Hello, horror lover. Are you ready for a long night of nightmares? Before we begin, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, and especially leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this because the crisp Alaskan air bit at my cheeks as I zipped up my jacket, casting one last glance at my beat-up Subaru parked at the trailhead. The forest loomed before me, a tapestry of green and gold, beckoning me into its depths. I shouldered my backpack, heavy with supplies for my 3-day solo hike, and took a deep breath. "You've got this, Alex," I muttered to myself, my voice barely audible over the whisper of wind through the trees. "Just you and nature, just like you wanted." As I set out on the narrow dirt path, fallen leaves crunching beneath my boots, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change my life forever. It wasn't dread exactly, but a peculiar sensation that tingled at the base of my spine. I dismissed it as pre-hike jitters and pressed on. The first mile passed quickly, my muscles warming up as I fell into a steady rhythm. The forest was alive with sound, birds calling to each other, small animals rustling in the underbrush, and the distant gurgle of a stream. I paused to consult my map, tracing the route with my finger. "Okay, another 2 miles to the first campsite," I said aloud, the sound of my voice oddly comforting in the vast wilderness. "Should make it before sundown easy." As I tucked the map away, a flash of movement caught my eye. A red fox stood frozen at the edge of the trail, its bright eyes fixed on me. We stared at each other for a long moment before it turned and disappeared into the undergrowth with a flick of its bushy tail. "Thanks for the welcome," I chuckled, feeling a childlike sense of wonder at the encounter. The trail began to climb, and I felt the familiar burn in my calves as I tackled the incline. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cool temperature. I'd been training for months for this hike, determined to prove to myself that I could handle the Alaskan wilderness solo. As I crested a small rise, the trees parted to reveal a breathtaking vista. The valley stretched out below me, a patchwork of deep greens and the silver ribbon of a river winding through it. Snow-capped mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks shrouded in mist. I fumbled for my camera, eager to capture the moment. "Wow," I breathed, snapping several photos. "This is why I came here." I was so engrossed in the view that I almost missed the sound. A low guttural growl that sent ice through my veins. Slowly, I lowered my camera and turned. There, not 20 feet away, stood a massive grizzly bear. Time seemed to stop as we locked eyes. The bear's fur was a rich brown, tinged with silver, and its shoulders hunched as it regarded me with small, intelligent eyes. I knew the rules. Don't run, don't make sudden movements, but every instinct screamed at me to flee. "Hey there, big guy," I said softly, my voice trembling. "I'm just passing through. No trouble here," the bear huffed, taking a lumbering step forward. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Slowly, carefully, I began to back away, keeping my eyes on the enormous creature. "That's it," I continued, fighting to keep my voice calm. "You go your way, I'll go mine." Another step back, and another. The bear watched me, seemingly uncertain. Then, miraculously, it turned and ambled back into the forest, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. I let out a shaky breath, my legs suddenly weak. "Holy shit," I whispered, leaning against a tree for support. "Holy shit." The encounter left me rattled, but also exhilarated. This was what I had come for, wasn't it? The raw, untamed wilderness with all its beauty and danger. I took a few moments to collect myself, then pressed on, more alert now to my surroundings. As the afternoon wore on, the forest grew denser, the trail narrower. The light took on a golden quality as it filtered through the leaves, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. I found myself pausing more often, not just to catch my breath, but to soak in the ethereal beauty of my surroundings. Almost there, I encouraged myself, checking my watch. The campsite was close now, and I was looking forward to setting up my tent and enjoying a hot meal. That's when it happened. One moment I was walking, lost in thought about the day's adventures, and the next there was a sickening crunch and a burst of pain so intense it stole the breath from my lungs. I looked down in confusion, unable to process what I was seeing. My left leg was caught in the steel jaws of a bear trap, hidden beneath a thin layer of leaves. "No," I gasped, the word barely audible. "No, no, no." The pain hit me in full force then, a white-hot agony that radiated from my ankle up through my entire body. I screamed, the sound echoing through the trees, startling a flock of birds into flight. "Help!" I yelled, knowing even as I did so that it was futile. "Somebody help me!" But there was no one to hear my cries. I was miles from the nearest trail, even further from civilization. The realization of my isolation crashed down upon me, more terrifying than even the bear had been. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, praying for a signal. The screen lit up, mocking me with its no-service message. I threw it aside in frustration, tears streaming down my face. "Okay, Alex, think," I said through gritted teeth. "You've got to get out of this." I examined the trap, trying to ignore the sight of my own mangled flesh. It was an old model, probably left over from years ago when trapping was more common in these parts. The rusted metal was slick with my blood. I grabbed the jaws of the trap, attempting to pry them apart. The pain was excruciating, but desperation gave me strength. I strained until my arms shook, but the trap didn't budge. "Come on," I shouted, frustration and fear making my voice crack. "Open, damn you!" But it was no use. The trap held firm, and I collapsed back, panting and dizzy from the pain and effort. The forest, which had seemed so welcoming just hours ago, now felt oppressive and sinister. Shadows lengthened as the sun began to set, and a chill crept into the air. I thought of my family, my parents who had worried about this trip, my sister who had made me promise to call every night. They wouldn't know anything was wrong until I failed to check in, and even then, how long would it take for a search party to find me? As if to underscore the direness of my situation, a wolf howled in the distance. The sound sent a shiver down my spine. I was injured, trapped, and now potential prey for any predator that might catch the scent of my blood. "Help!" I screamed again, my voice hoarse. "Please, somebody help me." But only the indifferent trees bore witness to my desperation. Night was falling fast now, and with it came a bone-chilling fear. I was trapped, injured, and completely alone in bear country. I fumbled in my pack for my flashlight and emergency blanket, knowing I had to prepare for a long, cold night. As I wrapped the thin foil around my shoulders, I tried to focus on survival. I had water, some food, and basic first aid supplies. I could make it through the night. I had to. But as the darkness closed in around me, bringing with it strange sounds and imagined threats, I couldn't stop the tears that flowed freely down my cheeks. The pain in my leg was a constant, throbbing reminder of my predicament. "Please," I whispered to the night, "please let someone find me." But as the stars appeared one by one in the clear Alaskan sky, I knew that my ordeal was only beginning. Whatever lay ahead, be it rescue or a desperate fight for survival, I was irrevocably changed. The carefree hiker who had set out this morning was gone, replaced by a person facing the fight of their life. With a deep breath, I steeled myself for the long night ahead, the jaws of the trap a constant painful reminder of how quickly life can change. The forest held its secrets close, and I was now unwillingly part of them, caught between the beauty and brutality of the wilderness. The first light of dawn filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor. I blinked awake, momentarily disoriented. For a blissful second, I thought I was in my tent, ready to start another day of hiking. Then the pain hit me like a freight train and reality came crashing back. "Fuck," I hissed through clenched teeth, the events of yesterday flooding back. The bear trap, my leg, the isolation. I'd managed to doze off intermittently during the night, exhaustion overcoming the pain and fear, But now, in the harsh light of day, there was no escaping the gravity of my situation. Gingerly, I shifted to examine my leg. The sight nearly made me vomit. My ankle was swollen to twice its normal size, angry red flesh visible through the torn fabric of my hiking pants. The bear trap's rusty jaws were still clamped tight, dried blood caking the metal. "Okay, Alex," I muttered to myself, fighting back panic. "You've got to get out of this. Think." I took stock of my supplies. I had water, some energy bars, a first aid kit, and my Swiss Army knife. Not much, but it would have to do. First things first, I needed to try to open this trap again. I gritted my teeth and grabbed the jaws, pushing with all my might. Pain exploded through my leg, and I screamed, the sound echoing through the empty forest. "Come on," I yelled, straining until my arms shook. "Open, you piece of shit!" But it was no use. The trap didn't budge an inch. Exhausted and defeated, I fell back, gasping for air. "Help!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "Somebody help me!" Only the chirping of birds answered my plea. I fumbled for my phone, praying for a miracle, but the no service message mocked me once again. Damn it! I hurled the useless device away in frustration, immediately regretting it as it disappeared into the underbrush. Stupid, Alex. Real stupid. I closed my eyes, trying to calm my racing heart. Panic wouldn't help me now. I needed to think clearly, to come up with a plan. First, I needed to clean the wound as best I could. I reached for my water bottle and first aid kit, steeling myself for what I knew would be an agonizing process. "This is gonna suck," I muttered, unscrewing the cap of the water bottle. I poured water over the wound, biting my lip to keep from screaming as the cool liquid hit my raw flesh. Using a gauze pad from the first aid kit, I gently cleaned around the edges of the trap, my stomach churning at the sight of my own mangled skin. "Shit, shit, shit," I hissed, each dab sending fresh waves of pain through my body. Once I'd cleaned it as best I could, I applied antibiotic ointment and wrapped gauze around the parts of my leg I could reach. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. As I worked, my mind raced. How long would it take for someone to realize I was missing? I was supposed to check in with my sister each night, but I'd missed last night's call. Would she raise the alarm immediately, or would she assume I just had no signal? "Come on, Liv," I whispered, thinking of my sister. "Notice something's wrong. Please." The sun climbed higher in the sky, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold fear gripping my heart. I tried to distract myself by observing my surroundings, looking for anything that might help me. The forest was alive with activity. Birds flitting from tree to tree, squirrels chattering as they scampered along branches. Life went on, oblivious to my plight. My stomach growled, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. I fished an energy bar out of my pack, unwrapping it with shaky hands. Each bite was a struggle to swallow past the lump of fear in my throat. As I ate, a rustling in the nearby bushes caught my attention. My heart leapt. Could it be a person? A park ranger, maybe? "Hello," I called out, hope coloring my voice. "Is someone there?" The rustling grew louder, and I held my breath. Then, a large black bear emerged from the underbrush, its nose twitching as it sniffed the air. "Oh, God," I whispered, my blood turning to ice in my veins. The bear hadn't noticed me yet, but it was only a matter of time. I was trapped, injured, and probably smelled of blood, the perfect easy prey. With trembling hands, I reached for my bear spray, praying I wouldn't have to use it. "Hey, bear," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and loud. "I see you there. No need to come any closer." The bear's head swung towards me, its small eyes focusing on my huddled form. It took a step forward, curiosity evident in its posture. "No!" I shouted, waving my arms. "Go away! Get out of here!" My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The bear took another step, then another. It was barely 10 feet away now. With a shaking hand, I raised the bear spray, my finger on the trigger. "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. Please don't make me use this. The bear rose up on its hind legs, towering over me. In that moment, I was sure I was going to die. I closed my eyes, bracing for the attack, but it never came. After what felt like an eternity, I heard a snort and the sound of retreating footsteps. I opened my eyes to see the bear ambling away, apparently having decided I wasn't worth the trouble. I collapsed back, my whole body shaking with adrenaline and relief. "Thank you," I whispered to whatever higher power might be listening. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." The bear encounter left me rattled, but it also sparked a renewed determination to survive. I couldn't just sit here and wait for rescue or death. I had to do something. With grim resolve, I turned my attention back to the trap. There had to be a way to open it. I examined it closely, looking for any kind of release mechanism. "Come on," I muttered, running my fingers along the rusted metal. "Give me something to work with here." After what felt like hours of poking and prodding, I found a small lever hidden beneath layers of rust and dirt. Hope surged through me. "This is it," I said, my voice hoarse from dehydration and stress. "This has to be it." I grasped the lever with both hands, ignoring the pain that shot through my leg at the movement. With every ounce of strength I had left, I pulled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a horrific screech of metal on metal, the jaws of the trap began to open. "Yes," I cried, tears of relief and pain streaming down my face. "Come on, come on!" Inch by agonizing inch, the trap opened. The pain was excruciating, but I didn't dare stop. This was my only chance. Finally, the jaws were open wide enough. With a strangled cry, I yanked my mangled leg free and collapsed on the forest floor, gasping and sobbing. "I did it," I whispered, staring at my freed leg in disbelief. I actually did it. But my elation was short-lived. As the adrenaline faded, the true extent of my injury became apparent. My ankle was a mess of torn flesh and exposed bone. There was no way I could walk on it. "Okay," I said, forcing myself to think logically. "Okay, you're free. That's step one. Now you need to get help." I looked around, trying to orient myself. The trail I'd been on yesterday seemed like a lifetime ago. Which direction had I come from? After a moment's deliberation, I chose a direction that I hoped would lead me back to civilization. Using a sturdy branch as a makeshift crutch, I hauled myself to my feet. The pain was immediate and intense. I bit back a scream, tasting blood as I bit my lip too hard. "One step at a time," I told myself, blinking back tears. "You can do this, Alex. One step at a time." And so I began my agonizing journey. Each step was a battle against pain and exhaustion. The forest, which had seemed so welcoming just a day ago, now felt like an endless green prison. As the sun began to set once more, casting long shadows through the trees, I realized I had a choice to make. Keep pushing through the night, risking further injury in the darkness, or find a safe place to rest and continue at first light. The decision was made for me as my leg gave out, sending me crashing to the forest floor. I lay there, panting and fighting back tears of frustration. "Okay," I gasped. "Okay, that's enough for today." I dragged myself to the base of a large tree, propping myself up against its trunk. As darkness fell, the forest came alive with night sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of nocturnal creatures. I huddled under my emergency blanket, shivering not just from the cold, but from the bone-deep fear that had become my constant companion. As I stared up at the stars peeking through the canopy, I thought of my family, my friends. Were they looking for me? Did they even know I was missing yet? "Please," I whispered to the uncaring night sky. "Please find me." But as exhaustion finally pulled me into a fitful sleep, I knew that my ordeal was far from over. The bear trap had been only the beginning. Now, injured and alone, I faced a desperate race against time, with the unforgiving Alaskan wilderness as my adversary. The night closed in around me, and I drifted off into uneasy dreams. the pain in my leg a constant reminder of the long journey still ahead. The first rays of dawn filtered through the dense canopy, rousing me from a fitful sleep. For a moment, disorientation clouded my mind. Then, as I shifted and pain lanced through my leg, the harsh reality of my situation came crashing back. "Another day in paradise," I muttered grimly, my voice hoarse from dehydration and disuse. I took stock of my situation. The makeshift bandage on my leg was soaked through with blood and pus, and the skin around the wound was an angry red, hot to the touch. Infection was setting in, and I knew that without proper medical attention, things would only get worse. "Okay, Alex," I said to myself, trying to summon some courage. "You've got to keep moving. Help isn't going to find you here." With gritted teeth, I used the tree trunk to haul myself to my feet. The world spun for a moment, and I had to close my eyes to fight off a wave of nausea. "Come on, legs," I growled. "Don't fail me now." I took a tentative step, leaning heavily on my makeshift crutch. The pain was excruciating, but I forced myself to keep going. Each step was a battle of will, a test of my determination to survive. As I limped along, I tried to distract myself from the pain by talking out loud. "You know, when I planned this hike, I was thinking more commune with nature, less fight for survival in the wilderness. Guess I should have read the fine print." The forest was alive with morning sounds, birds chirping, small animals scurrying through the underbrush. Under different circumstances, I might have found it beautiful. Now it just felt like the wilderness was mocking me with its indifference to my plight. After what felt like hours but was probably only about 30 minutes, I had to stop. My leg was throbbing and I was drenched in sweat despite the cool morning air. I slumped against a tree, panting heavily. "Water," I gasped, fumbling for my water bottle. I took a small sip, rationing what little I had left. As I recapped the bottle, a sound caught my attention, the faint trickle of running water. Hope surged through me. "A stream," I whispered. "Thank God." With renewed energy, I pushed off from the tree and hobbled in the direction of the sound. It took me another 15 minutes of painful progress, but finally, I broke through a thicket of bushes to find a small, clear stream winding its way through the forest. "Oh, you beautiful thing," I said, tears of relief stinging my eyes. I collapsed at the water's edge, scooping handfuls of the cold, clear liquid to my parched lips. After quenching my thirst, I turned my attention to my injured leg. Carefully, I unwrapped the blood-soaked bandage, hissing in pain as it stuck to my wound. The sight nearly made me pass out. My ankle was grotesquely swollen, the skin mottled with bruises and angry red lines spreading upward, clear signs of infection. "Shit," I muttered, fighting back panic. "This is bad. This is really, really bad." I knew I needed to clean the wound, but the thought of the pain it would cause made me hesitate. "Come on, Alex," I said, trying to psych myself up. "It's going to hurt like hell, but it needs to be done." Taking a deep breath, I plunged my injured leg into the stream. The shock of the cold water combined with the pain of the movement tore a scream from my throat. Birds took flight at the sudden noise, their wings flapping in alarm. "Fuck, fuck, fuck," I chanted through gritted teeth, tears streaming down my face as I gently tried to clean the wound. Once I'd done what I could, I used the last of my clean bandages to rewrap my ankle. It wasn't much, but it was the best I could do with what I had. As I sat there catching my breath and trying to gather the strength to move on, a rustling in the bushes across the stream caught my attention. My heart leapt into my throat. Was it another bear? "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Is someone there?" The rustling grew louder, and then, to my amazement, a man stepped out of the undergrowth. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with a weathered face and a salt and pepper beard. He wore camouflage hunting gear and carried a rifle. For a moment, we just stared at each other in shock. Then the man spoke. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "What in the hell happened to you, son?" A hysterical laugh bubbled up from my chest. Would you believe I got caught in a bear trap? The man's eyebrows shot up. A bear trap? Out here? Ain't been any legal trapping in these parts for years? Yeah, well, tell that to my leg, I said, gesturing to my mangled ankle. The man's expression turned serious as he took in my condition. You're in a bad way, son. Name's Frank. I was out checking my hunting blinds when I heard you screaming. Thought maybe a bear had got someone. Alex, I introduced myself. And yeah, I'm not doing so great. Been out here for 2 days now, I think. Lost track of time a bit. Frank nodded, his eyes scanning the forest around us. Well, Alex, looks like today's your lucky day. My cabin's about 3 miles from here. It ain't much, but I've got a radio we can use to call for help. Hope surged through me so strongly it was almost painful. You have no idea how good that sounds, I said, my voice cracking with emotion. Frank made his way across the stream, his movements sure and steady. As he got closer, his eyes widened at the sight of my injury. Jesus, boy, that's a nasty one. Can you walk at all? I nodded grimly. Sort of. It's slow going and it hurts like hell, but I can manage. All right then, Frank said, reaching down to help me up. Let's get you on your feet. We've got a bit of a trek ahead of us. With Frank's help, I managed to stand. He positioned himself on my injured side, letting me lean on him for support. Ready? He asked. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the pain I knew was coming, as I'll ever be. We set off at a slow but steady pace. Frank was patient, letting me rest whenever the pain became too much. As we walked, he kept up a steady stream of conversation, which I was grateful for. It helped keep my mind off the agony in my leg. So what brought you out to these parts, Alex? Frank asked as we navigated around a fallen tree. I chuckled weakly. Wanted to prove something to myself, I guess. Show that I could handle the Alaskan wilderness on my own. Frank snorted. Well, I'd say you've more than proved your toughness surviving what you have. But next time, maybe stick to the marked trails, yeah? Believe me, I said, wincing as we started up a small incline. If there is a next time, I'm bringing a whole search and rescue team with me. As we continued our slow progress, the forest around us began to thin out. The pain in my leg was a constant, throbbing presence, and I could feel myself weakening with each step. Frank, I gasped, feeling lightheaded. I don't know how much further I can go. The old hunter looked at me with concern. We're almost there, son. Just over this next rise. You can make it. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Every step was agony, every breath a struggle. But the thought of finally reaching safety kept me going. As we crested the hill, I saw it. A small log cabin nestled in a clearing. It was the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. There she is, Frank said proudly. Home sweet home. We had barely made it halfway across the clearing when my strength finally gave out. My legs buckled and I would have fallen if not for Frank's strong grip. Whoa there, I've got you, he said, practically carrying me the rest of the way. As we reached the cabin's porch, the world started to go dark around the edges. The last thing I remember is Frank's gruff voice saying, "Hold on, son, help's coming." Then mercifully, everything went black. The world came back to me in fragments. First, the smell, wood smoke and something medicinal. Then sensation. I was lying on something soft, a stark contrast to the forest floor I'd become accustomed to. Finally, sound, a crackling fire and a low, gruff voice speaking nearby. I forced my eyes open, blinking against the dim light. I was in a small, rustic cabin. Rough-hewn logs made up the walls, and a fire blazed in a stone fireplace. I was lying on a narrow bed, covered with a patchwork quilt. "Welcome back to the land of the living," came Frank's voice from nearby. I turned my head to see him sitting in a worn armchair, a steaming mug in his hands. "How long was I out?" I croaked, my throat dry and scratchy. Frank stood, bringing a glass of water to my lips. "About 6 hours. You were pretty far gone when we got here." Fever set in not long after. I sipped the water gratefully, then tried to sit up. A wave of dizziness hit me and I fell back against the pillows with a groan. "Easy there, son," Frank cautioned. "You're not out of the woods yet, figuratively speaking, that is." Despite the pain and disorientation, I couldn't help but chuckle at his attempt at humor. Did you call for help?" Frank nodded, his expression serious. "Radio's been acting up, but I got through to the ranger station. They're sending a chopper, but this weather's making it difficult. Could be a while yet." I closed my eyes, fighting back a wave of despair. "My leg." "I've done what I can," Frank said, his voice gruff but kind. "Cleaned it best I could and got some antibiotics in you. Had a few left over from when my dog got bit by a snake last summer. Figured they couldn't hurt." I opened my eyes again, looking at Frank with gratitude. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you." He waved off my thanks. Don't mention it. Anyone would have done the same." But I knew that wasn't true. In this vast wilderness, Frank had been my miracle, my lifeline. As if reading my thoughts, Frank cleared his throat awkwardly. "So, you feeling up to telling me how you ended up in this mess?" I nodded, wincing as I shifted to a more comfortable position. "I was on a solo hiking trip, wanted to challenge myself, prove I could handle the Alaskan wilderness." Frank snorted. "Well, I'd say you got more of a challenge than you bargained for." "You can say that again," I agreed ruefully. Everything was going fine until I stumbled into that damn bear trap. Hidden under some leaves, didn't see it until it was too late. Frank's bushy eyebrows furrowed. "That's mighty strange. Trapping's been illegal in these parts for years now. Wonder how long that thing's been out there." "Long enough to get good and rusty," I said, remembering the sickening crunch as it had clamped around my ankle. "Took me forever to get it open." Frank whistled low. "You managed to open it yourself? That's no small feat, son. Those things are designed to hold bears, after all." I shrugged, feeling a mix of pride and embarrassment at his praise. Didn't have much choice. It was either that, or become bear food. We lapsed into silence for a moment, the gravity of my ordeal hanging heavy in the air. Then a thought struck me. "Frank," I said urgently, "my family. They must be worried sick. Is there any way to let them know I'm okay?" Frank's expression turned apologetic. "Sorry, son. The radio's barely strong enough to reach the ranger station. Cell phones don't work out here, as I'm sure you discovered." I nodded, remembering the useless device I'd hurled away in frustration. Another wave of guilt washed over me as I thought of my sister, Liv. She must be out of her mind with worry by now. As if sensing my distress, Frank stood up. "Tell you what, why don't I rustle us up some grub? You look like you could use a good meal." I realized then that I was ravenous. "That sounds amazing, thank you." While Frank busied himself in the small kitchen area, I took stock of my condition. My leg was throbbing, but the pain seemed duller than before. Whether that was due to the antibiotics or simple exhaustion, I couldn't tell. I managed to prop myself up on my elbows, getting a better look at my surroundings. The cabin was small but cozy, filled with the kind of odds and ends one would expect from a lifetime of hunting and trapping. Mounted antlers adorned the walls, and well-worn books filled a small shelf. "You live out here year-round?" I called to Frank. He glanced over his shoulder as he stirred something on the small stove. "Nah, just during hunting season. Got a place in town for the rest of the year. The wife prefers it that way." "Your wife doesn't join you out here?" Frank chuckled. "Margaret? Nah. She says one of us has to stay civilized. This is my retreat, I suppose you'd call it." As he spoke, a savory aroma filled the cabin, making my stomach growl audibly. "Hope you like venison stew," Frank said, ladling the steaming mixture into 2 bowls. "It's about all I've got that isn't canned or dried." He brought the bowls over, helping me sit up properly before handing me one. The rich, meaty smell made my mouth water. "It smells incredible," I said, taking a cautious sip. The flavors exploded on my tongue. Tender meat, root vegetables, and a blend of herbs I couldn't identify. Oh man, this is amazing. Frank looked pleased. Old family recipe. Margaret says it's the only reason she keeps me around. We ate in companionable silence for a while. The only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the crackling of the fire. As I finished my stew, I felt stronger than I had in days. So, Frank said, setting his empty bowl aside, what do you do when you're not getting trapped in the wilderness? I chuckled weakly. I'm a software engineer, spend most of my days staring at computer screens. Guess that's part of why I wanted to do this trip. Get away from technology for a while, you know? Frank nodded sagely. Nature has a way of reminding us of what's important, though I reckon you could have done without quite such a harsh lesson. You can say that again, I agreed fervently. Just then a burst of static from the radio in the corner made us both jump. Frank hurried over, fiddling with the dials. This is Ranger Station Delta. Come in, Frank. Do you copy? A tinny voice crackled through the speaker. I copy Delta, Frank responded, shooting me a hopeful look. Any news on that chopper? There was a moment of static then. Weather's clearing up. ETA about 2 hours. How's your guest holding up? Frank glanced at me. He's awake and alert. Legs in bad shape, but he's tough. Roger that. Tell him to hang tight. Help's on the way. As the radio fell silent, I felt a surge of emotions. Relief, hope, and a touch of fear. The ordeal wasn't over yet, but for the first time since stepping into that bear trap, I felt like I might actually make it out of this alive. Frank turned to me, a smile crinkling his weathered face. You hear that, son? 2 hours and you'll be on your way to a real hospital. I nodded, suddenly feeling overwhelmed. Frank, I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't found me... He held up a hand, cutting me off. None of that now. You're not out of the woods yet, figuratively or literally. Save your thanks for when you're all patched up. I managed a weak smile. Fair enough. But seriously, Frank, you saved my life. Frank looked uncomfortable with the praise, but nodded gruffly. Well, let's just say you owe me a beer next time you're in town. Assuming you ever want to set foot in these woods again, that is. I laughed, wincing as the movement jostled my injured leg. I think I've had enough wilderness adventure to last me a lifetime. As we settled in to wait for the rescue helicopter, I found myself reflecting on the past few days. The terror, the pain, the moments of despair, they all seemed somehow distant now, like a bad dream fading in the light of day. But as I looked at Frank, this gruff stranger who had become my savior, I realized that I had also experienced something profound out here. A reminder of the strength of the human spirit and the unexpected kindness of strangers. Whatever lay ahead, surgery, recovery, facing my worried family, I knew I could handle it. After all, I had survived the Alaskan wilderness. Everything else was just details. As the first faint sounds of helicopter blades reached our ears, I closed my eyes, letting out a long breath. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in days I allowed myself to believe that everything might just turn out okay. The rhythmic thump of helicopter blades grew louder, drowning out the crackle of the fire in Frank's cabin. My heart raced with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Help was finally here, but I knew the ordeal was far from over. Frank helped me sit up, his weathered hands surprisingly gentle. You ready for this, son? I nodded, grimacing as pain shot through my leg. As ready as I'll ever be. The cabin door burst open, and 2 paramedics rushed in, their orange jumpsuits a stark contrast to the rustic interior. They moved with practiced efficiency, asking rapid-fire questions as they assessed my condition. Male, early 30s, trapped in the wilderness for approximately 3 days. One paramedic rattled off to his partner. Severe leg injury from a bear trap, signs of infection present. I tried to focus on their voices, but the pain and exhaustion were taking their toll. The world seemed to blur around the edges. Stay with us, buddy, the other paramedic said, noticing my fading consciousness. What's your name? Alex. I managed to mumble. All right, Alex, we're going to get you out of here. It might hurt a bit, but we need you to stay awake for us, okay? I nodded weakly. As they prepared to move me, I caught sight of Frank hovering anxiously in the background. Frank, I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. For everything. The old hunter nodded gruffly, emotion evident in his eyes despite his stoic expression. You take care, Alex, and remember, you owe me that beer. A ghost of a smile crossed my lips before pain overtook me again. The paramedics lifted me onto a stretcher, each movement sending shockwaves of agony through my body. I bit back a scream, tasting blood as I bit my lip too hard. The journey from the cabin to the helicopter was a blur of pain and disorienting motion. The forest I had struggled through for days now passed beneath me in a matter of minutes. As we lifted off, I caught one last glimpse of Frank's cabin, a tiny oasis of safety in the vast wilderness. Inside the helicopter, the noise was deafening. One of the paramedics leaned close to my ear, shouting to be heard over the roar of the engines. We're taking you to Fairbanks Memorial Hospital. It's about an hour flight. Try to relax if you can. Relax. Right. As if that was possible, with my leg feeling like it was on fire and my mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. Instead, I focused on the steady beep of the heart monitor they'd attached to me, using it as an anchor to keep myself from spiraling into panic. Time seemed to stretch and compress strangely during the flight. At times, I drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain medication they'd administered making the world hazy and distant. Other moments were crystal clear, filled with sharp spikes of pain that cut through the fog. Through it all, one of the paramedics, his name tag read Mike, stayed by my side, constantly checking my vitals and offering words of encouragement. You're doing great, Alex, he said during one of my more lucid moments. We're almost there. I licked my dry lips, finding my voice. My family, do they know? Mike nodded. The ranger station contacted them. They're meeting us at the hospital. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by a wave of guilt. I imagined my sister Liv, worry etched on her face as she waited for news. Our parents probably on the first flight they could catch to Alaska, all because of my stupid need to prove myself. The helicopter began its descent, the change in altitude sending a fresh jolt of pain through my leg. I gritted my teeth, determined not to cry out. Hang in there, Mike encouraged. We're landing now. Things are going to move pretty fast once we touch down. He wasn't kidding. As soon as the helicopter blades slowed, a flurry of activity erupted around me. My stretcher was quickly unloaded and rushed across the helipad towards the emergency entrance of the hospital. The bright lights of the ER were a shock after days in the dim forest and Frank's cabin. Doctors and nurses swarmed around me, their voices a cacophony of medical jargon. Severe soft tissue damage, signs of infection, prep for emergency surgery. I tried to follow what they were saying, but it was all too much. The pain, the lights, the noise, it was overwhelming. Just as I thought I might lose it completely, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. Alex! Oh my God, Alex! Liv. My sister had somehow made her way through the crowd of medical personnel. Her face appeared above me, tears streaming down her cheeks. Liv! I croaked, reaching out a hand. She grasped it tightly. You idiot! She sobbed, a watery smile on her face. What were you thinking? Before I could respond, a doctor gently but firmly moved her aside. I'm sorry, but we need to get him into surgery now. Liv nodded, squeezing my hand one last time before letting go. I'll be right here when you wake up, okay? Mom and Dad are on their way. As they wheeled me towards the operating room, I caught one last glimpse of my sister's tear-stained face. Then the doors swung shut, and I was alone with the medical team. The anesthesiologist appeared at my side, her voice calm and reassuring. All right, Alex, we're going to put you under now. When you wake up, the worst will be over. Just relax and count backward from 10 for me. I took a deep breath, wincing at the pain it caused. 10, 9, 8. The world faded to black before I reached 7. I drifted back to consciousness slowly, as if swimming up from the depths of a dark ocean. The first thing I became aware of was the absence of pain, or rather the dull, distant throb that had replaced the sharp agony I'd become accustomed to. As I blinked my eyes open, a blurry figure came into focus. Liv was slumped in a chair next to my bed, her head at an awkward angle that promised a stiff neck when she woke. "Liv," I tried to say, but it came out as more of a croak. Still, it was enough to rouse her. "Alex?" She sat up quickly, wincing at the movement. "Oh, thank God. How do you feel?" I considered the question. Like I got caught in a bear trap and spent 3 days in the wilderness. Liv let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Well, your terrible sense of humor is intact, at least." She helped me take a sip of water, the cool liquid soothing my parched throat. As the fog of anesthesia continued to lift, I became more aware of my surroundings. I was in a private hospital room, sunlight streaming through the window. My injured leg was elevated, encased in a bulky dressing. "How long was I out?" I asked. "About 18 hours, Liv replied. "The surgery took longer than expected. They had to do some pretty extensive repair work." I nodded, not really wanting to know the details just yet. "Mom and Dad?" "They just went to get some coffee. They've barely left your side since they arrived." Liv's expression turned serious. "Alex, you scared the hell out of us. When we got that call from the ranger station..." Guilt washed over me. "I'm so sorry, Liv. I never meant to put you all through this." She shook her head, squeezing my hand. "I know. Just promise me you'll stick to marked trails from now on, okay?" I managed a weak chuckle. "Trust me. I think my wilderness adventure days are behind me." Just then, the door opened and our parents rushed in. The next few minutes were a blur of tearful hugs, relieved exclamations, and gentle admonishments. As things calmed down, my father, ever the practical one, asked, "So what did the doctors say? What's the prognosis?" I looked to Liv, realizing I had no idea. She filled us in on what the doctors had told her. "They managed to clean out the infection and repair most of the damage," she explained. "But it's going to be a long recovery, Alex. There's a lot of physical therapy in your future." I nodded, trying to process this information. The reality of what had happened, of how close I'd come to dying alone in the wilderness, was starting to sink in. "There's something else," Liv continued hesitantly. "The doctors, they're not sure if you'll regain full use of your leg. There might always be some limitation." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd known on some level that this was a possibility, but hearing it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. My mother must have seen the distress on my face because she quickly jumped in. "But that's not certain, right? There's still hope for a full recovery?" Liv nodded. "Absolutely. The doctor said a lot depends on how the healing goes and how hard Alex works in physical therapy." I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. Okay, I can work with that. One step at a time, right?" My father squeezed my shoulder. "That's the spirit, son, and we'll be with you every step of the way." As my family rallied around me, offering support and love, I found myself thinking of Frank, the gruff old hunter who had saved my life, who had shown me kindness when I needed it most. I made a silent promise to myself that once I was back on my feet, however long that took, I'd find a way to thank him properly. For now, though, I was exactly where I needed to be. The long journey of recovery lay ahead, but I wasn't alone anymore. And after what I'd been through, I knew I could face whatever challenges came my way. As the conversation around me turned to logistics, how long I'd be in the hospital, arrangements for my care once I was discharged, I found myself drifting off again. But this time, it wasn't the darkness of unconsciousness that claimed me, but the healing embrace of normal sleep. The last thing I remember before dozing off was the warm pressure of Liv's hand in mine, a constant reminder that I was safe, I was loved, and against all odds, I had made it home. The rhythmic beeping of hospital machines had become the soundtrack to my days. 2 weeks had passed since my rescue, and while the immediate danger was over, the road to recovery stretched out before me like an endless highway. I was propped up in bed, idly flipping through channels on the small TV mounted on the wall, when a knock at the door interrupted my boredom. "Come in," I called out, expecting another nurse for the hourly checkup. To my surprise, it was Dr. Amelia Chen, the orthopedic surgeon who had pieced my leg back together. Her presence outside of rounds was unusual, and I felt a flutter of anxiety in my chest. "Alex," she greeted me with a small smile. "How are you feeling today?" I shrugged, wincing slightly at the movement. "About the same. Restless, I guess." Dr. Chen nodded, pulling up a chair beside my bed. "That's understandable. Actually, that's part of why I'm here. We think it's time to start discussing your rehabilitation plan." My heart rate picked up. "Does that mean I can get out of here soon?" "Potentially," she replied, her expression turning serious. "But Alex, I want to be clear. The road ahead is going to be challenging. The damage to your leg was extensive. We're looking at months of intensive physical therapy." I swallowed hard, the reality of my situation hitting me anew. "And what are the chances of a full recovery?" Dr. Chen hesitated for a moment before answering. "It's difficult to say with certainty. With dedication and hard work, you could regain a significant amount of function, but I have to be honest. There's a possibility you may always have some limitations." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I thought about my active lifestyle, the hiking trips I loved so much. Would I ever be able to do those things again? Sensing my distress, Dr. Chen leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Alex, I know this is hard to hear, but I've seen patients with injuries as severe as yours make remarkable recoveries. It all depends on your determination and willingness to put in the work." I nodded, trying to muster up some optimism. "So, what's the next step?" "We'd like to start you on some gentle exercises here in the hospital," she explained. "Once you're stable enough, we'll transfer you to a rehabilitation facility for more intensive therapy." As Dr. Chen outlined the plan, I found myself drifting, the enormity of what lay ahead overwhelming me. She must have noticed my distraction because she paused, placing a hand on my arm. "Alex, are you all right? I know this is a lot to take in." I blinked, focusing back on her concerned face. "Yeah, sorry, it's just... I never imagined something like this could happen, you know? One minute I'm out enjoying nature, the next..." Dr. Chen nodded sympathetically. "Life can change in an instant. But you're alive, Alex. You survived against incredible odds. That same strength will see you through this recovery." Her words sparked something in me, a flicker of the determination that had kept me going in the wilderness. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders as best I could in the hospital bed. "Okay, Doc. Let's do this. When do we start?" A smile broke across Dr. Chen's face. "That's what I like to hear. We'll begin tomorrow morning. For now, get some rest. You're going to need it." After Dr. Chen left, I lay back, my mind racing. The challenge ahead was daunting, but I was alive. After what I'd been through in the forest, I knew I could face anything. The next morning came early, heralded by a cheerful voice that cut through my uneasy sleep. "Rise and shine, sleeping beauty. Time to get those muscles moving." I cracked open an eye to see a tall, muscular man with a buzz cut and an impossibly wide grin standing at the foot of my bed. He wore scrubs with PT emblazoned on the chest. "Who are you?" I mumbled, still groggy from sleep and pain medication. "I'm Jake, your physical therapist and personal torturer for the foreseeable future," he announced, his grin never faltering. "Ready to start your journey back to the land of the vertical?" I groaned, already regretting my enthusiasm from yesterday. "Do I have a choice?" Jake laughed, a booming sound that seemed too big for the small hospital room. "That's the spirit. Now let's start with some simple exercises to get the blood flowing. What followed was an hour of what Jake cheerfully called gentle stretching, but felt more like medieval torture to my atrophied muscles. By the end, I was drenched in sweat and panting. "Great job, champ," Jake said, patting me on the shoulder. "Same time tomorrow. Rest up." As he left, I collapsed back onto my pillows, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. The days began to blur together, each one a cycle of pain, effort, and small, hard-won victories. Jake's relentless optimism became both a source of irritation and motivation. On my darkest days, when the pain seemed insurmountable and progress non-existent, his unwavering belief in my recovery kept me going. It was on one of these difficult days, about a week into my therapy, that I had an unexpected visitor. I was sitting up in bed, frustration etched on my face as I struggled to bend my knee even a few degrees, when a gruff voice from the doorway made me look up. "Well, don't you look like something the cat dragged in?" My jaw dropped. "Frank?" There he stood, the old hunter who had saved my life, looking decidedly uncomfortable in the sterile hospital environment. He held his worn baseball cap in his hands, twisting it nervously. "Hope you don't mind me dropping by," he said, stepping into the room. "The Rangers gave me an update on your condition, and I was in town for supplies, so—" I felt a grin spread across my face, the first genuine smile in days. "Mind? Frank, you saved my life. You're welcome here any time." He waved off my gratitude, settling into the chair beside my bed. None of that now, just wanted to see how you were getting on." We fell into an easy conversation, Frank's no-nonsense attitude a refreshing change from the forced cheer of the hospital staff. He told me about the changes in the forest as summer gave way to fall, and I found myself transported back to those woods. Not with fear this time, but with a strange sort of longing. As our chat wound down, Frank's expression grew serious. "Listen, Alex, I've seen a lot of injuries in my time, some that laid men low for good. But I've also seen folks come back from things doctors said they never would." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "The difference ain't in the injury, it's in here." He tapped his temple. "You survived 3 days in some of the roughest country there is with a mangled leg. You've got the grit. Don't you forget that." His words hit me hard, cutting through the fog of self-pity I'd been wallowing in. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Frank stood, seemingly embarrassed by the emotional turn of the conversation. "Well, I best be going. Got a long drive back." As he turned to leave, I called out, "Frank, wait." He paused at the door, looking back. "That beer I owe you," I said. "I haven't forgotten. Once I'm back on my feet, I'm buying you the biggest steak dinner Fairbanks has to offer." A rare smile cracked Frank's weathered face. "I'll hold you to that, son. You just focus on healing up." After Frank left, I sat in silence for a long while, his words echoing in my mind. When Jake arrived for my afternoon session, he found me with a new light in my eyes. "Someone's looking chipper," he observed. "Good news?" I shook my head. "No news. Just a reminder of what I'm capable of." Jake's ever-present grin widened. "Now that's what I like to hear. Ready to push it a little harder today?" For the first time since starting therapy, I met his enthusiasm with my own. "Bring it on." The session was grueling, more intense than any we'd done before. But with every painful stretch, every hard-won degree of motion, I felt stronger. Not just physically, but mentally. I had survived the wilderness. I had faced death and come out the other side. This recovery? It was just another challenge to overcome. As Jake helped me back into bed, his usual jovial manner gave way to something more sincere. "You did good today, Alex. Real good. Whatever lit that fire under you, hold on to it." I nodded, exhausted but feeling more positive than I had in weeks. "Thanks, Jake, for everything." That night, as I drifted off to sleep, I didn't dream of bear traps or endless forests. Instead, I dreamed of mountain trails and open skies. In the dream, my leg was strong, carrying me forward step by step. It was just a dream, I knew. The reality of my recovery would be far more difficult, filled with setbacks and frustrations. But for the first time since the accident, I truly believed I would walk those trails again someday. As consciousness faded, I made a silent promise to myself, to Frank, to everyone who had helped me. I would not just survive this. I would thrive. The journey ahead was long, but I was ready to take it one step at a time. The rehabilitation center was a far cry from the sterile hospital environment I'd grown accustomed to. Sunlight streamed through large windows, and the sound of determined grunts and encouraging shouts filled the air. It had been 2 months since my rescue from the Alaskan wilderness, and while my body was healing, my spirit was being put to the test. I gripped the parallel bars tightly, my knuckles white with effort. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I took another painful step forward. "That's it, Alex. You're doing great," Jake, my ever-enthusiastic physical therapist, encouraged from the sidelines. "Just 3 more steps to the end." I gritted my teeth, focusing all my energy on moving my injured leg. It felt like I was trying to drag a lead weight across the floor. 1 step, 2 steps. On the 3rd, my knee buckled. "Shit!" I cried out as I started to fall. Jake was there in an instant, his strong arms catching me before I hit the ground. "I've got you, buddy. Let's take a break," he said, helping me into a nearby wheelchair. Frustration bubbled up inside me, threatening to spill over. I'd been making progress, slow but steady, for weeks. But lately, it felt like I was hitting a wall. Jake must have sensed my mood because he crouched down in front of me, his usually jovial face serious. "Alex, you're pushing too hard. Recovery isn't a sprint, it's a marathon." I couldn't meet his eyes. "It's not enough. I should be further along by now." Jake sighed, running a hand over his buzz cut. "Look, why don't we call it a day? Get some rest and we'll hit it fresh tomorrow." I nodded glumly, too tired to argue. As Jake wheeled me back to my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was letting everyone down. My family, my doctors, even Frank, the old hunter who had saved my life. Back in my room, I transferred myself from the wheelchair to the bed, wincing at the pain that shot through my leg. I was so focused on my own misery that I almost didn't notice the flashing light on my phone indicating a new message. It was from Liv, my sister. "Hey bro, how's PT going? Mom and Dad are asking if you want visitors this weekend. Let me know, love you." Guilt washed over me. I'd been pushing my family away, embarrassed by my slow progress and frustrated with my limitations. I knew they wanted to help, but their concern sometimes felt suffocating. Before I could talk myself out of it, I hit the call button. "Alex," Liv's voice was warm and surprised. "I didn't expect to hear from you so soon." "Hey Liv," I said, trying to inject some cheer into my voice. "Just wanted to call and say hi." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you okay? You sound off." I sighed. Leave it to Liv to see right through me. "I'm fine. Just tired, I guess." "Alex?" Her voice was gentle but firm. "Talk to me. What's going on?" And suddenly, like a dam breaking, everything came pouring out. The frustration with my slow progress, the fear that I'd never fully recover, the guilt over what I'd put everyone through. By the time I finished, I was surprised to find tears streaming down my face. Liv listened patiently, not interrupting. When I finally fell silent, she spoke. "Oh, Alex, why didn't you tell us you were struggling so much?" I wiped my eyes, embarrassed. "I didn't want to worry you guys more than I already have." "That's what family is for, you idiot," Liv said, but there was no heat in her words. "We're supposed to worry about you, support you. You don't have to do this alone." Her words hit me hard, reminding me of something Frank had said during his visit. "You survived 3 days in some of the roughest country there is with a mangled leg. You've got the grit." "You're right," I admitted. "I've been so focused on doing this on my own, proving I'm strong enough. But maybe that's not the point." "Exactly," Liv said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "So, about this weekend, what do you say we come up and visit? Maybe bring you some real food to break up the hospital monotony? For the first time in weeks, I felt a genuine smile tug at my lips. That sounds great, actually. Thanks, Liv. After we hung up, I lay back on my bed, staring at the ceiling. The conversation with Liv had lifted a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. But it had also stirred up memories of my time in the wilderness, the terror, the pain, but also the strange moments of beauty and peace. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew I was startled awake by a clap of thunder. A fierce storm had rolled in, rain lashing against the windows. The room was dark, lit only by occasional flashes of lightning. As I lay there, listening to the storm rage outside, a vivid memory washed over me. I was back in the forest, huddled beneath a rocky overhang as a similar storm raged around me. I remembered feeling small, vulnerable, certain that I would die there alone. But I hadn't died. I'd survived, against all odds. A particularly bright flash of lightning illuminated the room, and in that brief moment, something caught my eye. There, on the bedside table, was the small carved wooden fox Frank had given me before I left the hospital. "To remind you of your strength," he'd said gruffly, clearly uncomfortable with the gesture. I reached out and picked up the carving, running my fingers over its smooth surface. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The fear and frustration that had been building for weeks began to ebb away, replaced by a quiet determination. I thought about everything I'd been through, the bear trap, the days of agony in the wilderness, the grueling surgery and recovery. I'd faced death and come out the other side. This plateau in my recovery, it was just another obstacle to overcome. With a newfound resolve, I swung my legs over the side of the bed. Pain shot through my injured leg, but I gritted my teeth and pushed through it. Slowly, carefully, I stood up. For a moment, I swayed unsteadily, my leg trembling with the effort of supporting my weight. But I didn't fall. I took one step, then another, making my way to the window. Outside, the storm continued to rage. But as I stood there, watching the rain and lightning, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. I'd weathered worse storms than this. A knock at the door interrupted my reverie. It was Jake, making his nightly rounds. "Alex," he said, surprise evident in his voice as he saw me standing by the window. "What are you doing up?" I turned to face him, a small smile on my face. "Just watching the storm, and thinking." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Oh? What about?" "About how far I've come, and how far I still have to go." I took a deep breath. "Jake, I owe you an apology. I've been a pretty terrible patient lately." Jake waved off my apology. "Hey, no worries. Recovery is as much mental as it is physical. We all hit rough patches." I nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Well, I think I'm ready to really commit to this. No more pity parties. Whatever it takes, I want to get better." A slow grin spread across Jake's face. "Now that's what I like to hear. You know, I've got some new exercises I've been wanting to try. Think you're up for pushing yourself a little harder?" I thought about Frank, about Liv and my family, about all the people who believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. "Yeah," I said, my voice firm. "I'm ready." As Jake helped me back to bed, outlining his plans for our next session, I felt a spark of hope ignite in my chest. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, I felt truly ready to face it. That night, as the storm outside began to fade, I drifted off to sleep with the wooden fox clutched in my hand. In my dreams, I walked through sun-dappled forests and scaled mountain peaks, my legs strong and sure beneath me. It was just a dream, I knew. But as I slept, a part of me held on to that feeling of strength and freedom. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new pain, new frustrations, but it would also bring new opportunities to grow, to heal, to prove to myself and everyone else that I was more than my injury. One step at a time, I told myself. One day at a time. I'd made it this far. Whatever came next, I would face it head on. The storm outside had passed and a new day was dawning. I was ready to meet it. 6 months had passed since my ill-fated encounter with the bear trap in the Alaskan wilderness. The rehabilitation center had become a second home, its halls and therapy rooms as familiar to me now as my own apartment. But today was different. Today was the day I'd been working towards for half a year. I stood at the beginning of the outdoor trail that wound through the rehabilitation center's grounds, leaning heavily on my cane. The path ahead was barely a mile long, with gentle slopes and well-maintained surfaces. To most people, it would be an easy stroll. To me, it represented the culmination of months of grueling work, pain, and determination. Jake, my physical therapist and now friend, stood beside me, his usual grin replaced by a look of quiet confidence. "You ready for this, Alex?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically serious. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool autumn air fill my lungs. "As ready as I'll ever be." Jake nodded, clapping me on the shoulder. "Remember, this isn't a race. Take it slow, listen to your body. I'll be right behind you the whole way." I gripped my cane tighter, steeling myself for what lay ahead. With a determined nod, I took my first step onto the trail. The initial stretch was deceptively easy. The path was level and my leg, while still weak, cooperated. But I knew better than to let my guard down. This was just the beginning. As we rounded the first bend, the trail began to slope gently upward. I felt the familiar twinge in my injured leg, a reminder of how far I still had to go. "You're doing great, Alex," Jake encouraged from behind me. "Remember your breathing exercises." I nodded, focusing on taking deep, even breaths as I pushed forward. The rhythmic tap of my cane on the path became a metronome, setting the pace for my labored steps. About a quarter of the way through, we came to a small wooden bridge spanning a bubbling creek. As I stepped onto it, a memory flashed through my mind. The stream I'd found in the wilderness, where I'd cleaned my wound and narrowly avoided a bear. The recollection was so vivid that for a moment I could almost smell the damp earth and pine needles. "Alex?" Jake's voice snapped me back to the present. "You okay?" I realized I'd stopped in the middle of the bridge, lost in thought. "Yeah, sorry. Just remembering." Jake's expression softened with understanding. "It's okay to take a breather if you need it." But I shook my head, determined. "No, I'm good. Let's keep going." As we continued, the trail became more challenging. Small inclines that I wouldn't have noticed before now felt like mountains. Each step sent shockwaves of pain through my leg, but I gritted my teeth and pressed on. Halfway through the trail, we came to a small clearing with a bench. Jake suggested we take a short break, but I was afraid if I sat down, I might not get back up. "I need to keep going," I panted, sweat beading on my forehead despite the cool air. Jake looked concerned. "Alex, there's no shame in resting. This is a marathon, not a sprint, remember?" I was about to argue when a familiar voice called out from across the clearing. "Well, I'll be damned. Look at you go, son." My head snapped up, hardly believing my ears. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, was Frank. The old hunter who had saved my life in the wilderness looked out of place in the manicured grounds of the rehab center, but his weathered face bore the same gruff kindness I remembered. "Frank?" I gasped, shocked. "What are you doing here?" He ambled over, a hint of a smile on his face. "Your sister called. Said today was a big day for you. Thought you might appreciate a friendly face." Emotion welled up in my throat, threatening to overwhelm me. Frank's presence brought back vivid memories of my ordeal, but also of the strength I'd found within myself during those harrowing days. Thank you," I managed to say, my voice thick. Frank nodded, then gestured to the trail ahead. "So, you gonna finish this thing or what?" His blunt question snapped me out of my emotional state. I straightened up, renewed determination flooding through me. "Damn right I am," I said, my voice stronger than it had been all day. As I set off again, I could hear Frank and Jake falling into step behind me, Their presence bolstered my resolve, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this journey. The second half of the trail was even more challenging than the first. The path narrowed and became slightly uneven, forcing me to concentrate on every step. My injured leg screamed in protest, but I pushed through the pain, Jake's voice in my ear reminding me to breathe, to focus, to keep going. 3/4 of the way through, disaster struck. My cane caught on a protruding root, throwing me off balance. I stumbled, my bad leg buckling beneath me. For a heart-stopping moment, I was sure I was going to fall. But before I could hit the ground, strong hands grabbed me from both sides. Jake and Frank had moved in perfect sync, catching me before I fell. "We've got you, Alex," Jake said, his voice steady. "You're okay?" I leaned on them heavily, my leg trembling with exertion and pain. For a moment I considered giving up. The end seemed so far away and I was so tired. Then Frank spoke, his gruff voice cutting through my doubt. "You didn't give up in that forest, son. Don't you dare give up now." His words hit me like a physical force, reminding me of everything I'd been through, everything I'd overcome. Slowly, I straightened up, taking my weight back onto my own legs. "You're right," I said, my voice shaky but determined. I didn't come this far to quit now. With renewed resolve, I set off again. Each step was agony, but I forced myself to keep moving. I thought of Liv, of my parents, of all the people who had supported me through this journey. I thought of the Alex who had entered that forest 6 months ago, naive and unprepared. And I thought of the Alex I was becoming. Stronger, more resilient, unbreakable. The final stretch of the trail seemed to stretch on forever. My world narrowed to the path in front of me, each step a monumental effort. Jake and Frank's encouragements faded into background noise as I focused all my energy on moving forward. And then suddenly, I saw it, the end of the trail. With a final surge of determination, I pushed myself towards the finish line. As I took the last step off the trail, emotions overwhelmed me. Exhaustion, pain, relief, and an overwhelming sense of accomplishment crashed over me in waves. My legs finally gave out, and I sank to the ground, tears streaming down my face. Jake was there in an instant, checking me over with professional concern. "You did it, Alex. How do you feel?" I looked up at him, then at Frank, who stood nearby with an uncharacteristic smile on his face. "I feel alive," I said, my voice hoarse but filled with wonder. Frank stepped forward, extending a hand to help me up. As he pulled me to my feet, he said gruffly, "Knew you had it in you, son. Never doubted it for a second." Standing there, supported by Jake and Frank, looking back at the trail I'd just conquered, I felt a profound shift within myself. The journey wasn't over. I knew I still had a long road ahead in my recovery. But I had proven to myself that I could overcome any obstacle, face any challenge. As we made our way back to the rehab center, my legs shaky but my spirit soaring, I found myself looking forward to what came next. For the first time since the accident, the future didn't seem like a daunting challenge, but an exciting adventure. That night, as I lay in bed, exhausted but content, I held Frank's carved wooden fox in my hand. It had become a talisman of sorts, a reminder of my strength and resilience. As I drifted off to sleep, I wasn't haunted by memories of pain and fear in the wilderness. Instead, I dreamed of mountains yet to climb and trails yet to explore. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through my window and a new sense of purpose. I reached for my phone, dialing a familiar number. "Hey, Liv," I said when my sister answered. "I've been thinking, how would you feel about a family camping trip once I'm out of here? Nothing too crazy, just a nice, safe, marked trail." Liv's laughter filled the line, joy and relief evident in her voice. "Oh, Alex, only you would go through all this and still want to go back into the woods, but you know what? I think that sounds perfect." As I hung up, I couldn't help but smile. The wilderness had nearly broken me, but it had also shown me what I was capable of. And now, step by step, I was reclaiming not just my strength, but my passion for life and adventure. The journey ahead was long, but I was ready to take it on, one step at a time. The crisp autumn air nipped at my cheeks as I stood at the trailhead, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. It had been exactly 1 year since my near-fatal encounter with the bear trap in the Alaskan wilderness. Now I was back, ready to face my demons and reclaim the passion for nature that had once defined me. Liv stood beside me, her face a mask of concern barely hidden behind a supportive smile. "You sure about this, Alex? We can always turn back, you know." I took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of my backpack and the comforting presence of my hiking stick, a far cry from the makeshift crutch I'd fashioned in desperation a year ago. "I'm sure," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to do this, Liv." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "All right then, lead the way, brother." We set off down the trail, this one well marked and maintained, nothing like the remote path I'd strayed from last year. My gait was still uneven, my left leg noticeably weaker than my right, but months of physical therapy had given me back a freedom of movement I once feared lost forever. As we hiked, the familiar sense of pine and damp earth filled my nostrils, bringing back a flood of memories, some terrifying, others oddly peaceful. I found myself telling Liv stories I'd held back before, not wanting to worry her. "You know, there was this moment on the second day," I said, carefully navigating a small incline, "when I saw a fox. It just stood there, staring at me. In that moment, I forgot about the pain, the fear. It was beautiful." Liv listened intently, her eyes wide. "You never told me that before." I shrugged. I guess I wasn't ready to remember the good parts along with the bad. As we continued, the trail became more challenging. My leg began to ache, a constant reminder of how far I'd come and how far I still had to go. But I pushed on, determined to reach our campsite. It was late afternoon when we finally arrived at the small clearing designated for camping. As Liv set up the tent, I stood at the edge of the site, looking out at the vast Alaskan wilderness stretching before us. "You okay?" Liv called, noticing my silence. I turned to her, a small smile on my face. "Yeah, I'm good. Just taking it all in." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, we sat around a small campfire, its warmth a comforting barrier against the encroaching chill of the night. "Alex," Liv said hesitantly, poking at the fire with a stick, "can I ask you something?" I nodded, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What was it really like out there? When you thought you might die?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken emotions. I stared into the flames, gathering my thoughts. "It was terrifying," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "There were moments when the pain was so bad, I almost wished for death. But mostly I was angry at myself for being so careless, angry at the wilderness for its indifference to my suffering." I paused, remembering those long, lonely nights. But there were other moments too, moments of incredible beauty and peace. I saw things out there, Liv, that I'll never forget. The stars at night, so bright it was like you could reach out and touch them. The way the light filtered through the trees at dawn. Even in my darkest hours, there was still beauty. Liv reached out, squeezing my hand. "I can't imagine how scared you must have been. How scared we all were when we got that call." Her voice trailed off, and I saw tears glistening in her eyes. For the first time, I truly understood the toll my ordeal had taken not just on me, but on my entire family. "I'm so sorry, Liv," I said, my own eyes welling up. "I never meant to put you through that." She shook her head, wiping away her tears. "Don't apologize. You're here now. You survived. That's all that matters." We sat in companionable silence for a while, the crackling of the fire and the distant calls of night birds the only sounds. As the night deepened, a sense of unease began to creep over me. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides, the shadows cast by our fire dancing menacingly at the edge of our campsite. "Alex," Liv's voice cut through my rising panic. "You're shaking. What's wrong?" I tried to speak, to reassure her, but no words came out. Suddenly I was back there, alone, in pain, certain that each sound in the darkness was a predator coming to finish me off. I can't," I gasped, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. "The darkness, it's too much." Liv was at my side in an instant, her arm around my shoulders. Hey, it's okay. You're safe. I'm right here." But her words couldn't penetrate the fog of panic that had descended over me. In that moment, I realized that while my body had healed, my mind was still trapped in that bear trap, still lost in those endless woods. "I need to get out of here," I said, stumbling to my feet. "I'm sorry, Liv. I thought I was ready, but I'm not. I can't do this." Liv didn't argue, didn't try to talk me out of it. She simply nodded, her face etched with concern and understanding. "Okay, we'll go. Just let me pack up." The hike back to the trailhead in the dark was a blur of fear and shame. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. Liv stayed close, her presence a lifeline in the sea of my panic. As we finally emerged from the trail, the sight of our car in the parking lot, this tangible link to civilization, nearly brought me to my knees with relief. The drive back to town was silent, the weight of my failure hanging heavy between us. It wasn't until we were back in our hotel room, the harsh fluorescent lights chasing away the last of the forest's shadows, that I finally broke down. "I'm sorry," I sobbed, the tears I'd been holding back for so long finally breaking free. "I thought I was stronger than this. I thought I'd beaten it." Liv sat beside me on the bed, pulling me into a tight hug. "Oh, Alex, you are strong. Look at how far you've come. This isn't a failure, it's just a setback." But her words, kind as they were, couldn't erase the bitter taste of disappointment. I had come here to reclaim my love for the wilderness, to prove to myself that the trauma hadn't beaten me. Instead, I'd fled in panic at the first sign of darkness. As the night wore on, my sobs eventually subsided, replaced by a hollow emptiness. Liv stayed awake with me, neither of us speaking, both lost in our own thoughts. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, I stood at the window, looking out at the town slowly coming to life. In the distance, I could see the edge of the forest, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "What now?" Liv asked softly, coming to stand beside me. I took a deep breath, trying to quiet the turmoil in my mind. "I don't know," I admitted. "I thought coming back here would be the end of it, you know? That I'd face my fears and everything would magically be better." Liv nodded, her eyes full of sympathy. "Recovery isn't linear, Alex. You've made incredible progress, but it's okay to still have struggles." As I stood there, watching the sun rise over the Alaskan landscape, I realized that this journey wasn't over. The bear trap had left scars not just on my body, but on my mind and spirit as well. Healing those wounds would take time, patience, and a different kind of courage than what had kept me alive in the wilderness. "I think," I said slowly, "that I need to talk to someone. A professional, I mean, about all of this." Liv squeezed my hand. "I think that's a great idea. And Alex, I'm proud of you. For coming this far, for trying, and for recognizing when you need help. That takes real strength." Her words warmed me, chasing away some of the cold despair that had settled in my chest. As we began to pack for our journey home, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. The man staring back at me was different from the one who had entered the Alaskan wilderness a year ago. Older, yes, and bearing the physical scars of my ordeal. But there was something else too, a depth in my eyes that spoke of hard-won wisdom and resilience. The wilderness had nearly claimed my life, and in many ways, it had claimed a part of me. But as I turned away from the mirror, ready to face whatever came next. I realized that it had given me something too, a new appreciation for the fragility and preciousness of existence, a gift and a burden I would carry with me always. As we left the hotel, stepping out into the crisp Alaskan morning, I took one last look at the distant forest. Someday, I promised myself I would return. Not today, not tomorrow, but when I was truly ready, in body, mind, and spirit. The wilderness had tested me, broken me, but it had not defeated me. And in that knowledge, I found a glimmer of hope for the journey ahead. The rhythmic tapping of my cane against the sidewalk echoed through the quiet suburban street. It had been 18 months since the bear trap incident, and while my physical recovery had plateaued, my mental journey was far from over. I paused at the bottom of a set of stairs leading up to a modest brownstone. The brass plaque beside the door read, Dr. Elena Reeves, Psychologist. Taking a deep breath, I began the slow climb. As I reached for the doorbell, my hand trembled slightly. These sessions always left me feeling raw and exposed, but I couldn't deny their importance in my healing process. Dr. Reeves opened the door, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners as she smiled. Alex, good to see you. Come on in. I followed her into the familiar office, settling into the comfortable armchair I'd come to think of as my own over the past few months. How have you been since our last session? Dr. Reeves asked, her voice gentle but probing. I considered the question, running my fingers over the smooth wood of my cane, a constant reminder of how my life had changed. I've been okay, I guess. The nightmares are less frequent now. Dr. Reeves nodded encouragingly. That's good progress, Alex. Can you tell me about the last nightmare you had? I closed my eyes, the vivid images flooding back. I was back in the forest. It was dark, and I could hear something moving in the underbrush. I tried to run, but my leg wouldn't work. I looked down, and the bear trap was there, clamped around my ankle. But this time, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get it open. And how did that make you feel? Dr. Reeves prompted. Terrified, I admitted, but also angry. Angry at myself for getting into that situation, angry at the wilderness for its indifference. Dr. Reeves leaned forward slightly. Alex, we've talked before about misplaced guilt. The trap wasn't your fault. Nature isn't capable of indifference, it simply is. I nodded, having heard this before, but still struggling to internalize it. I know that logically, but emotionally, it's harder to accept. That's understandable, she said. Trauma doesn't always respond to logic, but recognizing these feelings is an important step. Now tell me about your week. Did you try the exposure exercise we discussed? I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. I did. I went to the park like we talked about, found a quiet spot near some trees. And how did that go? I let out a shaky breath. It was intense. At first, all I could think about was escape routes, potential dangers. But I made myself stay, used those grounding techniques you taught me. Dr. Reeves smiled warmly. That's excellent, Alex. It takes a lot of courage to face your fears like that. Did anything surprise you about the experience? I thought for a moment. Yeah, actually. After a while, when the panic started to subside, I noticed things. The way the sunlight filtered through the leaves, the sound of birds singing. For a moment, it was almost peaceful. That's a significant breakthrough, Dr. Reeves said. It shows that you're starting to reconnect with the positive aspects of nature, not just the traumatic memories. As the session continued, we delved deeper into my feelings about the wilderness, my lingering fears, and my hopes for the future. By the time our hour was up, I felt drained, but somehow lighter. Before you go, Alex, Dr. Reeves said as I stood to leave, I have a suggestion for our next steps. Have you considered returning to Alaska? The question hit me like a physical blow. Alaska? I don't know if I'm ready for that. Dr. Reeves held up a hand reassuringly. Not to the wilderness, not yet. But perhaps to Fairbanks, where you were treated. It might be helpful to revisit the place where your recovery began, to see how far you've come. I mulled over her words as I made my way home. The idea of returning to Alaska filled me with a mix of dread and something else. Curiosity? Longing? I couldn't quite place it. As I entered my apartment, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Liv. "Hey bro, how was therapy? Still on for dinner tonight?" I smiled, grateful as always for my sister's unwavering support. "It was good," I texted back. "And yeah, definitely still on. I have something I want to run by you." That evening, as Liv and I sat in my small kitchen, the aroma of homemade pasta sauce filling the air, I broached the subject. "So, Dr. Reeves had an interesting suggestion today," I began, twirling spaghetti around my fork. Liv looked up, her eyebrows raised in question. "Oh? What's that?" I took a deep breath. "She thinks I should consider going back to Alaska, not to the wilderness," I added quickly, seeing the alarm on Liv's face. "Just to Fairbanks, where I was treated." Liv was quiet for a moment, considering. "Wow, that's not big. How do you feel about it?" "Honestly, I'm terrified," I admitted. "But also, I don't know. Maybe it could be good for me to see it all again, but from a position of strength this time." Liv reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "If you think it might help, I support you. And you know I'd go with you in a heartbeat." I smiled, feeling a rush of affection for my sister. "I know you would. Let me think about it some more, okay?" Over the next few weeks, the idea of returning to Alaska took root in my mind. I found myself looking at photos of Fairbanks online, reading about the city's history and culture. Slowly, the fear began to give way to a cautious excitement. Finally, after another session with Dr. Reeves where we discussed the potential benefits and risks, I made my decision. I was going back to Alaska. The preparations for the trip were a whirlwind of activity. Liv insisted on coming with me, taking time off work to support me on this journey. As our departure date approached, I found myself growing more anxious but also more determined. The flight to Fairbanks was a surreal experience. As the landscape below transformed from cityscapes to vast wilderness, I felt my heart rate increase. Liv, sensing my distress, placed a comforting hand on my arm. "You've got this, Alex," she said softly. "Remember how far you've come." As we landed and made our way through the familiar airport, memories washed over me, being wheeled through these same halls on a stretcher, weak and in pain. But now, I walked under my own power, my cane a support rather than a crutch. Our first stop was Fairbanks Memorial Hospital. Standing in front of the building where I had spent weeks recovering, I felt a complex mix of emotions: gratitude, fear, and a strange sense of homecoming. "Do you want to go inside?" Liv asked gently. I shook my head. "Not yet. But I think I'd like to come back before we leave. Maybe thank some of the staff who took care of me." Over the next few days, we explored Fairbanks. I found myself drawn to the edges of the city, where civilization gave way to the wild. Standing at these borderlands, looking out at the vast Alaskan wilderness, I felt a familiar fear rise up, but also something else, a quiet appreciation for its beauty, its power. On our last day in Fairbanks, I made a decision that surprised even me. "Liv," I said over breakfast, "I want to go to the trailhead, where it all started." Liv's eyes widened. "Are you sure? We don't have to if you're not ready." I nodded, feeling more certain than I had in months. "I'm sure. I need to do this." The drive to the trailhead was tense, memories of that fateful day playing through my mind like a film reel. But as we pulled into the small parking area, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I stood at the edge of the trail, leaning on my cane, looking out at the forest that had nearly claimed my life. The fear was still there, a low hum in the back of my mind, but it no longer consumed me. "I did it," I said softly, more to myself than to Liv. I survived you. As we turned to leave, a flash of movement caught my eye. There, at the edge of the trees, stood a red fox. It watched us with curious eyes, its bushy tail swaying gently. For a moment, I was transported back to that day in the wilderness, when a similar fox had appeared, offering a moment of beauty amidst the pain and fear. But this time there was no trap, no desperation, just me, whole and healing, facing my past. The fox disappeared into the underbrush, and I felt something shift inside me. The wilderness had tested me, broken me, but it had also shaped me. I wasn't the same person who had entered these woods 18 months ago, and I never would be again. But perhaps that wasn't entirely a bad thing. As Liv and I drove back to Fairbanks, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I knew that my journey wasn't over. There would still be nightmares, still be days when the fear threatened to overwhelm me. But I had faced my demons, returned to the place where it all began, and come out the other side. The scars, both physical and emotional, would always be a part of me. But they were no longer a prison. They were a testament to my survival, my resilience, my strength. As the Alaskan landscape rolled by outside the car window, I found myself looking forward to what came next. For the first time in 18 months, the future didn't loom as a daunting challenge, but as an adventure waiting to unfold. I turned to Liv, a small smile on my face. You know, I think I might be ready to try that family camping trip after all. Maybe somewhere a little less remote to start. Liv's answering smile was bright enough to rival the Alaskan sun. I think that sounds perfect, Alex. One step at a time, right? One step at a time. It had become my mantra over these long months of recovery, and now, as we drove away from the wilderness that had nearly broken me, I realized it was more than just a saying. It was a promise to myself, a way forward. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in a long time, I felt truly ready to walk it. The early morning sun filtered through the dense canopy of the Smoky Mountains, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. I stood at the trailhead, double-checking my backpack one last time. The crisp mountain air filled my lungs, carrying with it the scent of pine and damp earth. My heart raced with anticipation as I zipped up my pack, the sound echoing in the quiet clearing. "You sure you don't want to stick to the main trail, Alex?" My friend Jake called out from where he was securing his tent to his backpack. I turned to face him, a confident grin spreading across my face. "Come on, Jake. Where's your sense of adventure? This lesser-known trail is supposed to have some of the most breathtaking views in the park." Jake shook his head, a worried frown creasing his brow. "I don't know, man. It's not on any of the official maps. What if something goes wrong?" I waved off his concern with a laugh. "Nothing's going to go wrong. I've got my phone, a compass, and enough supplies for a day hike. I'll be back before sunset, I promise." Sarah, Jake's girlfriend, joined us, her long brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Alex, maybe Jake's right. We came here to camp together, not split up." I felt a twinge of guilt at the concern in her voice, but the allure of unexplored territory was too strong to resist. "Look, guys, I appreciate the worry, but I'll be fine. You two enjoy your romantic day by the lake, and I'll regale you with tales of my adventure over the campfire tonight." Jake sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of my jaw. "At least take my portable charger. Your phone's always dying at the worst times." I hesitated for a moment before accepting the small device, tucking it into a side pocket of my backpack. "Thanks, Jake. See? Now I'm more than prepared." Sarah stepped forward and gave me a quick hug. "Just be careful, okay? And be back before dark. We'll have dinner waiting." With a final wave, I set off down the narrow, overgrown path that branched off from the main trail. The excitement of exploration thrummed through my veins, drowning out the small voice of caution in the back of my mind. The first hour of the hike was everything I had hoped for. The trail wound through stands of towering oak and hickory trees, their leaves creating a cathedral-like canopy above me. Shafts of sunlight broke through here and there, illuminating patches of vibrant wildflowers that dotted the forest floor. As I rounded a bend, a breathtaking vista opened up before me. A hidden waterfall cascaded down a rocky cliff face, the water sparkling like diamonds in the morning light. I pulled out my phone to snap a picture, only to find the battery already down to 60%. Damn it, I muttered, fumbling for Jake's charger. But as I pulled it out, I realized with a sinking feeling that I'd forgotten to bring the cord. Great job, Alex, I chided myself. Real prepared. Shaking off the momentary frustration, I decided to press on. The trail became increasingly challenging as the day wore on, with steep inclines and tricky rock formations to navigate. But each new discovery, a hidden grove of ancient trees, a crystal-clear mountain stream, a family of deer bounding through the underbrush, made the effort worthwhile. It wasn't until late afternoon that I began to feel the first stirrings of unease. The sun, which had been my constant companion and guide, was now obscured by the densening forest canopy. I pulled out my phone to check the time and my location, only to find the battery had dipped below 20%. Okay, time to head back, I said aloud, trying to quell the nervous flutter in my stomach. I turned to retrace my steps, but the path behind me looked unfamiliar. Had I taken a fork in the trail without realizing it? I spun in a slow circle, trying to get my bearings. The trees all looked the same, their trunks blurring together in a sea of brown and green. The cheerful birdsong that had accompanied me earlier had faded, replaced by an oppressive silence broken only by the pounding of my own heart. Stay calm, I whispered to myself. You're not lost. You're just temporarily misplaced. I pulled out my compass, but in my increasingly panicked state, I couldn't remember which direction I had come from. East? West? The needle swung mockingly, pointing resolutely north but offering no real guidance. As the realization that I was well and truly lost began to sink in, the forest around me seemed to close in. Shadows lengthened, taking on menacing shapes. Every rustle in the underbrush made me jump, imagining mountain lions or bears lurking just out of sight. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone once more. The battery icon glowed an angry red, down to its last 5%. I tried to pull up the GPS, praying for a signal, but the screen remained stubbornly blank. No, 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 I muttered, my voice rising with each repetition. This can't be happening. As if in response to my desperation, the phone let out a pitiful beep and went dark. The screen reflected my pale, terrified face for a moment before fading to black. "Help!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the trees. "Can anyone hear me?" Only the mocking call of a distant bird answered. The last rays of sunlight were fading now, the forest transitioning from green to gray in the twilight. I sank to the ground, my back against a rough tree trunk, as the full weight of my situation crashed down upon me. I was lost in one of the largest wilderness areas in the eastern United States, with no food, no water, and no means of communication. The temperature was already dropping, and I had nothing but the light jacket I'd worn for my short day hike. As darkness enveloped the forest like a suffocating blanket, every sound became magnified. The hoot of an owl made me flinch. The snap of a twig in the distance sent my heart racing, imagining unseen predators circling ever closer. Jake was right, I whispered, hugging my knees to my chest. I should have listened. I should have stayed on the main trail. But recriminations wouldn't help me now. I needed to survive the night and figure out a plan in the morning. I gathered what fallen branches I could find in the near darkness, constructing a makeshift shelter against the base of a large oak tree. As I huddled in my flimsy lean-to, the events of the day played on repeat in my mind. Every decision, every missed opportunity to turn back, every ignored warning sign tormented me. The confidence I'd felt that morning seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a gnawing fear that clawed at my insides. "I'm sorry," I whispered into the darkness, imagining Jake and Sarah waiting anxiously at the campsite. "I'm so sorry." The long night stretched ahead, filled with unfamiliar sounds and imagined terrors. As exhaustion finally began to overtake fear, I made a silent vow. If I survived this, I would never take nature, or the concerns of my friends, lightly again. With that thought, I drifted into a fitful sleep, unaware that this was only the beginning of an ordeal that would push me to the very limits of human endurance. The forest was alive with sounds I had never noticed before. Every rustle, every snap of a twig, every whisper of wind through the leaves sent a jolt of adrenaline through my body. I huddled tighter in my makeshift shelter, the rough bark of the oak tree digging into my back. The excitement of adventure that had fueled me earlier in the day had long since faded, replaced by a gnawing fear that seemed to grow with the darkness. "It's okay, Alex. You're going to be fine," I whispered to myself, my voice sounding small and unconvincing in the vast wilderness. "Someone will find you in the morning. Jake and Sarah will raise the alarm. You just need to make it through the night." A sudden howl pierced the air, causing me to jolt upright, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Wolves? Coyotes? My mind raced through the possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. "It's far away," I tried to reassure myself. "They're not interested in you. Just stay quiet and still." The temperature had dropped significantly since sunset, and I cursed myself for the 1,000th time for not bringing more supplies. My light jacket did little to ward off the chill that seemed to seep into my very bones. I pulled my knees tighter to my chest, trying to conserve what little body heat I had. As the hours crawled by, exhaustion began to battle with fear. My eyelids grew heavy, but every time I started to drift off, a new sound would jerk me back to alertness. The forest never truly slept, I realized. It was a constant symphony of life and death, predator and prey, with me as an unwilling audience. In the depths of the night, my mind began to play tricks on me. Shadows seemed to move at the corner of my vision, taking on monstrous shapes before dissolving back into darkness. The rustling of leaves became whispered conversations, taunting me with their unintelligible murmurs. "Hello?" I called out weakly, immediately regretting the decision as my voice echoed through the trees. "Is anyone there?" Only the chirping of crickets answered me. I don't know when I finally succumbed to sleep, but my dreams were a chaotic mix of pursuit and panic. I ran through endless forests, always with something terrible just behind me, always on the verge of being caught. A sharp crack jolted me awake. For a moment I was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings adding to my confusion. Then reality came crashing back, somehow even more terrifying than my nightmares. The pre-dawn light filtered weakly through the trees, casting everything in a gray, otherworldly glow. My body ached from the cold and the hard ground, and my mouth felt like it was full of cotton. Thirst clawed at my throat, a stark reminder of how unprepared I was for this ordeal. As I stumbled to my feet, my stomach let out a loud growl. The granola bar I'd eaten on the trail yesterday seemed like a distant memory. I had no food, no water, and no idea which direction would lead me back to civilization. "Okay, Alex, think," I said aloud, needing to hear a human voice, even if it was my own. "What's the first rule of being lost? Stay put. Search and rescue will have an easier time finding you if you don't move." But as the morning wore on and the sun climbed higher in the sky, doubt began to creep in. What if Jake and Sarah thought I had just gone home early? What if they weren't worried yet? How long could I survive here without water? By midday, thirst had become an all-consuming obsession. My tongue felt swollen in my mouth, and my lips were cracked and painful. The sound of running water tormented me, seeming to come from all directions and none at all. "Water," I croaked. "I need to find water." The decision to leave my makeshift camp was agonizing. Every survival show I'd ever watched screamed at me to stay put, but the need for water overrode everything else. I picked a direction that seemed to slope downhill, reasoning that water would collect in the lowest points. As I stumbled through the underbrush, my feet catching on hidden roots and rocks, I tried to distract myself from my thirst by imagining the rescue that surely must be coming. "They'll have dogs," I muttered. And helicopters. Maybe even one of those infrared cameras. They'll find me in no time. But as the day wore on and the sun began its descent once more, hope began to fade. My steps became more unsteady, my vision blurring at the edges. Was that the sound of water or just the rush of blood in my ears? Just as I was about to collapse, the trees thinned, revealing a small stream cutting through the forest floor. The sight of water sent a surge of energy through my depleted body. I half ran, half fell towards the stream, plunging my face into the cool, clear water without a thought for parasites or bacteria. The first mouthful was ecstasy, soothing my parched throat and bringing me back from the brink of despair. I drank deeply, only stopping when my stomach began to cramp. As the initial euphoria of finding water faded, new fears set in. The sun was setting again, and I was even further from where I had started. The chance of rescuers finding me now seemed more remote than ever. I cupped my hands and drank more water, trying to ignore the trembling in my fingers. "It's okay," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "You found water. That's the most important thing. You can survive for weeks without food, but only days without water. You bought yourself time." But as darkness fell once more, and the forest came alive with nighttime sounds, time felt like a mixed blessing. How many nights would I have to endure in this green prison? How long before hunger and exposure took their toll? I gathered what materials I could find to create another shelter, this time closer to the stream. The work helped distract me from the gnawing emptiness in my stomach and the growing sense of despair in my heart. As I huddled in my new shelter, listening to the gentle gurgle of the stream, I found myself talking out loud, needing to fill the silence with something other than the sounds of the forest and my own fears. "Hey, Jake," I said, imagining my friend's worried face. "I really messed up, huh? You were right to be concerned. I should have listened to you. I promise. If I get out of this, I'll never ignore your advice again." I paused, swallowing hard against the lump in my throat. "And Sarah, I'm so sorry for ruining your camping trip. You guys must be worried sick. Please don't give up on me. I'm trying to stay strong, but I'm scared. I'm really scared." A twig snapped nearby, causing me to flinch and draw further back into my shelter. The rational part of my brain knew that most animals were more afraid of me than I was of them, but in the darkness, rationality was in short supply. As the night wore on, I drifted in and out of a fitful sleep. My dreams a confusing mix of rescue scenarios and terrifying chases through endless woods. Each time I woke, the reality of my situation hit me anew, a wave of fear and despair that threatened to drown me. But with the first light of dawn came a renewed determination. I had survived 2 nights in the wilderness. I had found water. I was still alive. As I crawled out of my shelter, muscles aching and stomach growling, I made a vow to myself. "I will survive this," I said, my voice stronger than it had been since this ordeal began. "I will find my way back. This forest will not beat me." With that declaration, I set about planning my next move. Find food, leave markers for rescuers, keep hope alive. The journey ahead would be difficult, but I was determined to see it through. Little did I know, the true tests of my endurance and will to survive were only just beginning. The morning sun filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. I stirred from my fitful sleep, my body aching from 2 nights on the hard ground. The initial relief of finding the stream had faded, replaced by a gnawing hunger that seemed to consume my every thought. I crawled out of my makeshift shelter, wincing as my stiff muscles protested. The stream gurgled nearby, a constant reminder of my one small victory. I cupped my hands and drank deeply, the cool water soothing my parched throat, but doing little to quiet the angry growls of my empty stomach. "Food," I muttered, my voice hoarse. "I need to find food." I scanned the area around me, trying to recall anything useful from the handful of survival shows I'd watched. Berries? Nuts? What was safe to eat, and what might poison me? A flash of red caught my eye, and my heart leaped. Berries. I stumbled towards the bush, my legs weak from hunger and exhaustion. The berries were small and bright, clustered in bunches that seemed to beckon to me. As I reached out to pluck one, a voice that sounded suspiciously like Jake's echoed in my head. "Are you sure those are safe, Alex? Remember that time you ate those wild mushrooms on our camping trip and got sick?" I hesitated, my hand trembling. "But I'm so hungry," I said aloud, arguing with the Jake in my head. "I need to eat something." The imaginary Jake persisted. "You need to survive. Eating the wrong thing could kill you faster than starvation." Frustrated tears welled in my eyes. "Then what am I supposed to do?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the trees. A nearby bird took flight, startled by my outburst. I sank to the ground, overwhelmed by hunger and indecision. As I sat there, head in my hands, a memory surfaced from a wilderness survival book I'd skimmed years ago. "The universal edibility test," I murmured, sitting up straighter. "I can test if they're safe to eat." With renewed purpose, I plucked a single berry from the bush. I rubbed it on the inside of my wrist, waiting to see if it caused any irritation. After 15 minutes with no reaction, I touched it to my lip, then the tip of my tongue. No tingling, no burning, I noted aloud, my voice shaking with anticipation. "That's good, right?" I waited another 15 minutes, my stomach growling in protest at the delay. When no ill effects appeared, I finally allowed myself to chew the berry, holding it in my mouth without swallowing. The burst of sweetness on my tongue was almost overwhelming after days without food. It took every ounce of willpower not to immediately grab handfuls of berries and devour them. "Wait," I commanded myself. "Just a little longer." After several more agonizing minutes with no signs of adverse reactions, I finally swallowed the single berry. I waited, tense and alert for any signs of nausea or stomach pain. When none came, relief washed over me. "Thank you," I whispered, not sure who I was thanking, God, fate, or just dumb luck. I began to eat the berries in earnest, forcing myself to go slowly despite my body's demands for more. As I ate, I tried to take stock of my situation. I had water. I had found a food source, however meager. But I was still lost, with no idea how to get back to civilization. "Think, Alex," I said, needing to hear a human voice even if it was my own. "What's the next step?" I remembered reading that lost hikers should stay put to make it easier for rescuers to find them. But how long should I wait? How long before I needed to try to save myself? As if in answer to my questions, a distant sound caught my attention. Was that a helicopter? Hope surged through me. "Here!" I shouted, jumping to my feet. "I'm here." I ran towards a small clearing, waving my arms frantically. The sound grew louder, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of metal glinting in the sun through a break in the trees. "Help!" I screamed, my voice raw with desperation. "Please, I'm down here." But as quickly as it had appeared, the sound began to fade. The helicopter was moving away, oblivious to my presence. "No," I whispered, then louder. "No, come back. Please, come back." I sank to my knees, watching helplessly as my chance at rescue disappeared. The forest seemed to close in around me, suddenly feeling more like a prison than ever before. As the adrenaline faded, exhaustion hit me like a physical blow. I crawled back to my shelter, feeling defeated. The berries I'd eaten churned in my stomach, threatening to come back up as despair washed over me. "They're looking for me," I tried to reassure myself. "They haven't given up. I just need to hang on a little longer." But as the day wore on and no more signs of rescue appeared, doubt began to creep in. What if they were searching in the wrong area? What if they thought I was already dead? As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink visible through breaks in the canopy, I made a decision. I couldn't just sit and wait any longer. I needed to try to find my way out. "Okay, Alex," I said, gathering what little strength I had left. "Time to be proactive. You need to climb a tree, get your bearings." I selected a tall pine near my campsite, its lower branches within reach. With shaking arms, I pulled myself up, fighting against the weakness in my muscles. "Come on," I grunted, forcing myself to climb higher. Just a little more. Finally, I broke through the upper canopy. The view took my breath away, miles of unbroken forest stretching in every direction. The beauty of it was almost enough to make me forget my dire situation. Almost. I scanned the horizon, desperate for any sign of civilization, a road, a tower, anything. But there was nothing but trees as far as the eye could see. Despair threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not giving up. There has to be a way out." As I climbed down, a new plan began to form in my mind. I would follow the stream. Water always led to larger bodies of water, and larger bodies of water often led to people. Back on the ground, I began to gather what supplies I could. I used strips of bark to weave a crude basket, filling it with berries for the journey. I found a sturdy branch to use as a walking stick. As night fell, I allowed myself one more night in my shelter. "Rest," I told myself. "You'll need your strength for tomorrow." Sleep was elusive, my mind racing with plans and fears for the journey ahead. When I did drift off, my dreams were a confused jumble of rescue helicopters always just out of reach and endless forests with no way out. I woke before dawn, a sense of purpose driving me despite my exhaustion and hunger. As the first light of day began to filter through the trees, I stood at the edge of the stream, my meager supplies in hand. "All right," I said, taking a deep breath. "It's now or never. Time to save yourself, Alex." With one last look at the shelter that had been my home for the past few days, I began to walk, following the stream deeper into the unknown forest. As I moved forward, a mix of fear and determination coursed through me. I had no idea what challenges lay ahead, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to die in this forest without a fight. "I'm coming home," I whispered, as much a promise to myself as to those waiting for me. "Whatever it takes, I'm coming home." With those words, I pressed on, the sound of the stream my constant companion as I ventured into the heart of the wilderness, hoping against hope that it would lead me back to civilization. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly before me, a sea of green that threatened to swallow me whole. I had been following the stream for what felt like days, though in reality, it had probably only been hours. My makeshift berry basket was nearly empty, and the gnawing hunger in my stomach had become a constant, painful companion. "Keep moving," I muttered to myself, my voice hoarse from disuse. "Just keep moving." But each step was becoming harder than the last. My legs felt like lead, and my vision was starting to blur around the edges. Was it just exhaustion, or was something else happening to me? As I stumbled over a protruding root, a wave of dizziness washed over me. I reached out to steady myself against a nearby tree, its rough bark scraping against my palm. That's when I saw it, or thought I saw it. A flickering shape at the edge of my vision, like a person darting between the trees. "Hello?" I called out, my heart suddenly racing. "Is someone there?" Silence was my only answer. I squinted, trying to focus on where I'd seen the movement, but there was nothing there. Just more trees, more endless forest. "Get it together, Alex," I chided myself. "There's no one there. It's just your imagination." But as I pushed on, following the stream's winding path, the shapes kept appearing. Sometimes it was a flicker of movement. Other times it was clearer. A figure that looked disturbingly like Jake, or Sarah, or my mom. They never spoke, never came closer. Just watched me with sad, accusing eyes before fading back into the forest. "You're not real," I said firmly, closing my eyes tight for a moment. "You're not real. You're not real. You're not real." When I opened my eyes, the figures were gone, but a new sound had taken their place. A helicopter, its rhythmic chopping growing louder by the second. Hope surged through me, giving me a burst of energy. I ran towards a small clearing, waving my arms frantically and screaming at the top of my lungs. "Here! I'm here! Help me!" The sound grew louder and louder until it was almost deafening. I could practically feel the downdraft from the rotors, see the flashing lights through the trees. But as I burst into the clearing, ready to be rescued at last, the sound suddenly cut off. The clearing was empty. There was no helicopter, no rescue. Just more trees and the mocking gurgle of the stream. I fell to my knees, a scream of frustration and despair tearing from my throat. No, please, no, come back. But there was nothing to come back. There had never been a helicopter. It had all been in my mind. As the realization sank in, something inside me broke. The tears I had been holding back for days finally came, racking my body with heaving sobs. I curled up on the forest floor, not caring about the damp earth or the insects crawling around me. I can't do this, I whimpered. I can't go on. I'm sorry, Jake. I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm sorry, Mom. I tried. I really tried. I'm not sure how long I lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness. The forest sounds blurred together into a cacophony that seemed to taunt me with its vitality while I lay there, wasting away. It was the sound of my own voice that finally roused me. I was talking, having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. And remember that time we went camping by the lake, Jake? And Sarah got freaked out by that huge spider in her tent? I blinked, coming back to myself. How long had I been talking? What else had I said? The realization that I was losing my grip on reality was like a splash of cold water to the face. I forced myself to sit up, ignoring the protesting aches of my body. No, I said firmly, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. I'm not giving up. I'm not dying here. I looked around, trying to orient myself. The stream was still there, a silver ribbon cutting through the green. I had to keep following it. It was my only hope. Standing up was a monumental effort. My legs shook, threatening to give out, but I gritted my teeth and forced myself upright. I took one step, then another, each one a battle against my own body's desire to just lie down and give up. One foot in front of the other, I muttered. That's all you have to do. Just keep moving. As I walked, I tried to focus on positive thoughts, on reasons to keep going. I thought of Jake and Sarah, probably sick with worry, of my mom, who had already lost my dad. I couldn't put her through losing me too. But it was hard to stay positive when every step was agony, when my stomach felt like it was eating itself, when my throat was so dry it hurt to swallow. The hallucinations kept coming, more vivid now. Sometimes it was people, sometimes animals. Once I could have sworn I saw a cabin through the trees, but when I rushed towards it, it vanished like smoke. Not real, I reminded myself each time. Focus on what's real. The ground under your feet, the sound of the stream, the bark of the trees. That's real. Hold on to that. As the day wore on, my steps became more unsteady. I was weaving now, bumping into trees, tripping over nothing. But I kept going, driven by a determination I didn't know I possessed. It was late afternoon when I saw it. At first I thought it was another hallucination, a break in the trees up ahead, sunlight streaming through in a way I hadn't seen since I got lost. But as I got closer, I realized it was real. The trees were thinning out. Was I reaching the edge of the forest? Hope gave me a final burst of energy. I quickened my pace, ignoring the screaming protests of my muscles. The light grew brighter, the gap in the trees wider. I was almost running now, my heart pounding with anticipation. I burst through the tree line, expecting to see a road, a town, any sign of civilization. Instead, I found myself on the edge of a vast clearing, and in the center of that clearing was a small, dilapidated cabin. For a moment, I just stood there, not trusting my eyes. Was this another trick of my mind? But no, the cabin remained, solid and real. Oh, thank God, I breathed, tears of relief streaming down my face. Thank God, thank God, thank God. I stumbled towards the cabin, my legs finally giving out just as I reached the worn wooden steps. I crawled up them, using the last of my strength to push open the creaking door. The interior was dusty and abandoned, cobwebs hanging in the corners. But it was shelter. It was a sign of human presence. It was hope. I collapsed onto the dirty wooden floor, my body finally surrendering to the exhaustion it had been fighting for days. As my consciousness began to fade, I had one last coherent thought. I made it. I'm going to survive this. Then darkness claimed me and I knew no more. I awoke to the sound of rain pattering against a wooden roof. For a moment, I was disoriented, my mind struggling to piece together where I was. The hard surface beneath me wasn't the forest floor, and the air smelled of dust and old wood rather than pine and damp earth. Then it all came rushing back. The desperate trek through the forest, the hallucinations, and finally, the discovery of the cabin. I sat up slowly, my body protesting every movement. The cabin was small, just one room with a few pieces of broken-down furniture. Weak daylight filtered through grimy windows, casting long shadows across the floor. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely more than a croak. "Is anyone here?" Only the steady drumming of rain answered me. I was alone, but for the first time in days, I was sheltered from the elements. I stumbled to my feet, fighting a wave of dizziness. My throat was parched, my stomach a hollow ache. I needed water, and I needed it now. To my immense relief, I spotted an old metal bucket in the corner. I grabbed it and stumbled outside, holding it out to catch the rain. The cool drops on my skin were heavenly, and I tilted my head back, letting the rain wash over my face. Once the bucket was half full, I brought it inside and drank deeply, not caring about potential contaminants. The water was the sweetest thing I'd ever tasted. With my most pressing need addressed, I began to explore the cabin more thoroughly. It was clearly long abandoned, but it might contain something useful. I opened creaky drawers and peered into dusty corners, hoping for any sign of food or supplies. In a cupboard, I found an old can of beans, the label faded and peeling. My hands shook as I examined it. The expiration date was years past, but in my desperate state, it looked like a feast. "Please don't be rotten," I muttered as I searched for something to open it with. After several minutes of frantic searching, I found a rusty can opener in a drawer. The smell that wafted out when I finally got the can open was musty and unappetizing. But to my starving senses, it was ambrosia. I scooped the cold, congealed beans into my mouth with my fingers, barely taking the time to chew. Only when the can was empty did I slow down, the reality of my situation settling back in. I was still lost, still in danger. But I had shelter, water, and had found some food. It was more than I'd had yesterday. As the rain continued to fall outside, I took stock of my situation. "Okay, Alex," I said aloud, needing to hear a human voice, even if it was my own. "You've made it this far. Now what's the plan?" I knew I couldn't stay in the cabin forever. Eventually, I'd need to try to find my way back to civilization. But for now, it was shelter, a place to regain my strength. As I pondered my next move, my eye caught something I'd missed in my initial survey of the cabin, a faded map tacked to one wall. My heart leaped as I hurried over to examine it. The map was old and weathered, showing a section of the Smoky Mountains. Much of it was faded to the point of illegibility, but I could make out some landmarks, rivers, peaks, and what looked like trail markers. "This is it," I breathed, hope surging through me. This could be my way out. I spent the next few hours studying the map intently, trying to match what I could see with my memories of the journey that had brought me here. It was frustrating work. So much of the map was unclear, and I couldn't be certain of my current location. As daylight began to fade, I realized I'd need to spend the night in the cabin. The thought of another night alone in the wilderness, even in shelter, sent a shiver down my spine. But I didn't have a choice. I gathered what I could to make a bed, some old sacks I found in a corner, my own jacket. It wasn't comfortable, but it was better than the forest floor. As I lay there in the growing darkness, listening to the rain, the events of the past few days played through my mind. The initial excitement of exploring, the growing fear as I realized I was lost, the hallucinations and despair that had nearly broken me. "I'm sorry, Jake," I said softly into the darkness. "You were right to be worried. I should have listened to you." I imagined what Jake might say if he were here. Probably something like, "Well, you've always been a stubborn idiot. But you're a survivor, Alex. You'll make it out of this." The thought brought a small smile to my face. Jake had always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. I couldn't let him down now. Sleep came in fits and starts. My dreams a confused jumble of forest paths, search parties always just out of reach, and the faces of those I loved, looking at me with a mixture of worry and hope. I awoke to weak sunlight filtering through the grimy windows. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a world washed clean. I felt stronger than I had in days, the food and rest doing wonders for my body and spirit. With renewed determination, I returned to the map. In the clear light of day, I noticed something I'd missed before. A faint trail marked in red, leading from an area that looked similar to where I'd been lost to a point marked Ranger Station. My heart raced with excitement. Could this be my way out? I knew I had to try. I couldn't stay in this cabin forever, and this was the best lead I had. I gathered what supplies I could, the bucket for water, some old rags I could use for bandages if needed, and the can opener, which could serve as a crude tool. Before I left, I took one last look at the map, trying to burn the route into my memory. Then, with a deep breath, I stepped out of the cabin and back into the forest. The world outside seemed different somehow. Maybe it was just the effects of rest and food, but the forest didn't feel quite as menacing as it had before. The trees were still tall and dense, but now they seemed almost protective rather than threatening. I oriented myself as best I could and began to walk, following what I hoped was the trail from the map. Every step was a mixture of hope and anxiety. Hope that each ridge or turn would reveal the ranger station, anxiety that I was going in completely the wrong direction. As I walked, I talked to myself, to the forest, to the friends and family I hoped were still searching for me. "I'm coming," I said, my voice growing stronger with each step. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm coming. I'm not giving up." The day wore on, and fatigue began to set in again. But it was different this time. A clean tiredness born of exertion, not the bone-deep exhaustion of despair. I was moving with purpose now, driven by the hope that each step was bringing me closer to rescue. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, I crested a small hill and felt my heart skip a beat. There, in the distance, was a clearing. And in that clearing, a structure that could only be man-made. "The ranger station," I whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "I found it. I actually found it." Tears blurred my vision as I began to run, ignoring the protests of my tired muscles. With each step, the station grew larger, more real. It wasn't a hallucination or a trick of the light. It was solid. It was there. And it meant I was saved. As I burst into the clearing, I saw a figure emerge from the station, alerted by the sound of my approach. For a moment, we both froze, staring at each other in disbelief. Then the ranger was running towards me, shouting into a radio clipped to his shoulder. "I've got him. Repeat, I've got the lost hiker." As the ranger reached me, I finally allowed myself to believe it was over. I was found. I was safe. "You're okay now, son," the ranger said, his voice kind as he supported my suddenly weak legs. "You're safe. Let's get you inside." As he led me towards the station, I heard the distant thrum of a helicopter. Rescue was coming. I had survived. The ordeal was over. But as I looked back at the forest that had been both my prison and my teacher, I knew that its impact on me would last a lifetime. I had been lost, but in finding my way, I had also found a strength I never knew I possessed. The ranger station hummed with activity. I sat on a worn couch, wrapped in a warm blanket, a steaming mug of sweet tea clutched in my trembling hands. The events of the past hour felt surreal, the moment of rescue, the flurry of activity as more rangers arrived. The crackling radios announcing my discovery to the search team spread throughout the forest. "Alex?" A gentle voice broke through my daze. I looked up to see the ranger who had found me, John, he'd said his name was, crouching in front of me. "How are you feeling? Do you think you're up to answering a few questions?" I nodded, my voice still raspy as I replied, "Yeah, I think so." John smiled encouragingly. "You're doing great, son. We just need to understand what happened to help prevent something like this from occurring again." As I recounted my story, the ill-fated decision to explore the unmarked trail, the days of wandering lost, the discovery of the abandoned cabin, I could see the mix of concern and admiration in John's eyes. "That's quite an ordeal you've been through," he said when I finished. "You showed remarkable resourcefulness out there. Not many people would have made it as far as you did." His words should have been comforting, but they triggered something unexpected in me. Suddenly, the full weight of what I'd been through came crashing down. My body began to shake uncontrollably, and I felt hot tears streaming down my face. "I thought I was going to die out there," I choked out between sobs. "I thought no one would ever find me." John placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "But you didn't give up. You kept fighting. That's why you're here now." As I struggled to regain my composure, a commotion outside caught our attention. John moved to the window, then turned back to me with a smile. "I think there are some people here who've been very worried about you." The door burst open and suddenly the room was filled with familiar faces. Jake, Sarah, my mom. For a moment, we all froze, as if none of us could quite believe this was real. Then my mom rushed forward, enveloping me in a fierce hug. "Oh, Alex," she sobbed, her tears mingling with mine. "My baby. I thought I'd lost you." I clung to her, breathing in her familiar scent, feeling like a child again in her arms. "I'm sorry, Mom," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." Jake and Sarah joined the embrace, turning it into a group hug that felt like coming home. When we finally separated, Jake punched my arm lightly, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Don't you ever scare us like that again, you idiot." I managed a weak laugh. "Trust me, I don't plan to." As the initial emotion of the reunion settled, a park official entered the room. "Alex," he said gently, "I know you've been through a lot, but we need to get you to a hospital for a proper checkup. Your friends and family can ride with you in the ambulance." The next few hours passed in a blur of medical examinations, IV fluids, and concerned doctors. I was diagnosed with moderate dehydration and malnutrition, but miraculously I had avoided any serious injuries or illnesses from my time in the wilderness. It wasn't until late that night, lying in the quiet hospital room with my mom dozing in a chair beside me, that I had a moment to truly process everything that had happened. A soft knock at the door roused me from my thoughts. Jake peeked in, then entered when he saw I was awake. He pulled up a chair next to my bed, his face serious in the dim light. "How are you really doing, Alex?" he asked quietly. I considered the question for a moment. "Honestly, I'm not sure. It all feels surreal, like it happened to someone else." Jake nodded. "I can't even imagine what you went through out there. When you didn't come back that first night, God, Alex, I've never been so scared in my life." The guilt that had been simmering beneath the surface bubbled up. "Jake, I'm so sorry. You were right to be worried about that trail. I should have listened to you." He shook his head. "Hey, no. This isn't about being right or wrong. I'm just so damn glad you're okay." We sat in companionable silence for a while, the quiet beeping of the hospital machines a reminder of how close I'd come to a very different outcome. Finally, Jake spoke again. "You know, while you were missing, I kept thinking about all the things I never said, all the stuff we always think we have time for later." I turned to look at him, sensing the weight behind his words. He met my gaze, his eyes intense. "I love you, man. You're my best friend, and I don't know what I'd do without you. I needed you to know that." Emotion welled up in my throat. "I love you too, Jake." Out there when things were at their worst, thinking about you and Sarah, it kept me going. You guys saved my life as surely as if you'd been there with me. Jake reached out and gripped my hand tightly, words seemingly beyond him at that moment. We stayed like that until he finally dozed off in the chair, his hand still holding mine. As the night wore on, sleep eluded me. My mind kept replaying moments from the forest, the terror, the despair, but also the moments of beauty and the strength I'd found within myself. I thought about the turning points, the discovery of the stream, finding the cabin, deciphering the old map. Each one had been a moment when I could have given up, but something inside me had refused to quit. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the hospital window, I made a silent vow to myself. I would never take my life, or the people in it, for granted again. I would live with purpose, with gratitude for each day. The ordeal in the forest had nearly broken me, but it had also revealed a strength I never knew I possessed. I had faced my deepest fears and survived. Whatever challenges life threw at me from now on, I knew I could face them. A soft stirring beside me drew my attention. My mom was waking up, her eyes immediately seeking me out, as if to reassure herself that I was really there. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said softly, reaching out to stroke my hair. "How are you feeling?" I took her hand in mine, squeezing it gently. "I'm okay, Mom. Really. I'm going to be okay." And for the first time since my rescue, I truly believed it. The forest had changed me, challenged me, nearly destroyed me. But it had also taught me invaluable lessons about survival, about the strength of the human spirit, and about the power of hope. As the hospital began to come to life around us, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The journey ahead, recovery, dealing with the psychological aftermath of my ordeal, would not be easy, but I was ready to face it. I had walked through my darkest night and emerged on the other side. Whatever came next, I would face it with the same determination that had kept me alive in the wilderness. This wasn't the end of my story. It was a new beginning. The hospital room felt like a cocoon, safe and isolated from the outside world. But as days passed, I knew I couldn't stay in this protective bubble forever. The real journey, the journey back to normal life, was about to begin. On the day of my discharge, Dr. Patel, the psychologist assigned to my case, paid me a final visit. Her kind eyes studied me as she sat in the chair beside my bed. "How are you feeling about going home, Alex?" she asked. I fiddled with the edge of my blanket, avoiding her gaze. "Honestly, I'm scared," I admitted. "Everything here is controlled, safe. Out there, I don't know." Dr. Patel nodded understandingly. "That's a normal reaction after what you've been through. Remember, recovery isn't just physical. It's a mental and emotional process, too." She handed me a card. "This is my number. I want you to call me if things get overwhelming, day or night, and I'll see you for our scheduled sessions next week." I clutched the card like a lifeline. "Thanks, Dr. Patel, for everything." As she left, my mom entered, carrying a small duffel bag with fresh clothes. "Ready to go home, sweetheart?" I managed a small smile. As ready as I'll ever be. The drive home was surreal. The familiar streets of our town seemed both comforting and alien. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the car window, watching the world rush by. "You okay, honey?" Mom asked, glancing at me with concern. "Yeah," I murmured. "It's just strange. Everything looks the same, but it feels different." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "It'll take time, Alex, but we're all here for you." As we pulled into our driveway, I saw a small gathering on our front porch. Jake, Sarah, and a few other close friends were waiting, a welcome home banner strung up behind them. For a moment, panic gripped me. I wasn't ready for this, wasn't ready to face everyone. But then Jake stepped forward, his familiar grin breaking through my anxiety. "Hey, wilderness man," he called. "Thought you might need a welcome committee." Despite myself, I felt a smile tugging at my lips. "You guys didn't have to do this," I said as I got out of the car. Sarah enveloped me in a warm hug. Of course we did. We missed you, Alex. The next few hours passed in a blur of quiet conversation, gentle jokes, and comforting presence of friends. They were careful not to overwhelm me, seeming to sense when I needed space or when the memories became too much. As evening fell and the others left, Jake lingered behind. We sat on the front porch steps, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "You know," Jake said softly, "when you were missing, I used to sit out here every night, just hoping I'd see you walking up the street." I turned to look at him, seeing the remnants of fear and worry etched on his face. "Jake, He shook his head, cutting me off. "No, let me finish. I need you to understand something. What happened? It didn't just happen to you. It happened to all of us who love you. We're all on this journey back with you." His words hit me like a physical blow. In my focus on my own recovery, I hadn't fully considered how my ordeal had affected those around me. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I never meant to put you through that." Jake bumped my shoulder with his, and, "Hey, none of that, we're just glad you're home. But Alex, promise me you'll let us help you. Don't try to do this alone." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I promise." That night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the forest, lost and alone. The darkness of my room felt oppressive, closing in on me like the dense canopy of trees. Unable to bear it any longer, I got up and went to the kitchen. To my surprise, I found my mom already there, nursing a cup of tea. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, pulling out a chair for me. I shook my head, slumping into the seat. "Every time I close my eyes, I'm back there." Mom reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "Oh, sweetheart, I wish I could take this pain away from you." "I keep thinking," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What if I had died out there? What if you never knew what happened to me?" Tears welled up in my mom's eyes. "But you didn't, Alex. You survived. You came back to us. That's what we have to focus on." We sat in silence for a while, the ticking of the kitchen clock marking the passage of time. Finally, Mom spoke again. "You know, your father would be so proud of you." I looked up, startled. We rarely spoke about my dad, who had passed away when I was young. "You think so?" I asked, my voice small. Mom nodded, a sad smile on her face. "I know so. You have his strength, his determination. He never gave up, and neither did you." Her words washed over me, bringing a comfort I hadn't realized I needed. For the first time since coming home, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could get through this. The next few weeks were a roller coaster of emotions. Some days I felt almost normal, able to laugh with friends and enjoy simple pleasures. Other days, the weight of my experience pressed down on me, making it hard to even get out of bed. My sessions with Dr. Patel became a lifeline. In her office, I could voice the fears and doubts that I kept hidden from my friends and family. "I feel like I'm two different people," I confessed during one session. "There's the Alex everyone expects me to be, the survivor, the strong one. And then there's the real me, who's terrified and lost." Dr. Patel leaned forward, her expression serious. "Alex, those aren't two different people. They're both you. The strength that got you through your ordeal, and the fear you're feeling now, they're both valid, both real." Her words struck a chord. "So how do I reconcile them?" "By accepting both parts of yourself," she replied. "Acknowledge your fear, your trauma, but also recognize the strength it took to survive. Integration, not separation, is the key to healing." As the weeks turned into months, I slowly began to find my footing. The nightmares became less frequent, the panic attacks less intense. I started to venture out more, even joining Jake and Sarah for short hikes in the local park. The first time we went, I froze at the trailhead, my heart racing. Jake noticed immediately, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder. "We can turn back," he said quietly. "No one will think less of you." I took a deep breath, focusing on the feeling of solid ground beneath my feet, the sound of Sarah's gentle encouragement, the warmth of Jake's hand on my shoulder. "No," I said finally. "I need to do this." That short walk was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. But with each step, I felt a little of the old fear falling away, replaced by a new understanding of my own resilience. As we emerged from the tree line, the setting sun bathed everything in a warm, golden light. I stopped, taking in the beauty of the moment. "You okay?" Sarah asked, concern in her voice. I turned to her and Jake, feeling a smile, a real, genuine smile, spread across my face. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." In that moment, I realized that the journey back wasn't about returning to who I was before. It was about becoming someone new, someone stronger, more aware, more appreciative of life and the people in it. The forest had changed me. There was no denying that. But as I stood there with my friends, watching the sun set on another day, I knew that change didn't have to be a bad thing. I was still on the journey back, and would be for a long time. But for the first time, I felt truly hopeful about where that journey might lead. 6 months had passed since my rescue from the Smoky Mountains. The leaves were turning golden, a crisp autumn chill hanging in the air. I stood at the edge of the forest where my ordeal had begun, my heart pounding in my chest. Jake and Sarah flanked me, silent pillars of support. "You don't have to do this, Alex," Sarah said softly, her hand on my arm. "No one would blame you if you turned back." I shook my head, my eyes fixed on the trail ahead. "No, I need to do this. I need to face it." Jake squeezed my shoulder. "We're with you, every step of the way." Taking a deep breath, I took my first step onto the trail. The familiar scent of pine and damp earth filled my nostrils, triggering a flood of memories. For a moment, I was back there, lost, alone, desperate. My breath caught in my throat, panic rising. "Alex?" Jake's voice cut through the fog of memory. "You okay, man?" I nodded, forcing myself to breathe slowly. "Yeah, just give me a minute." As we hiked deeper into the forest, I found myself hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow. The rustle of leaves in the wind became the footsteps of unseen predators. The call of a distant bird morphed into a cry for help. But with each step, each conquered fear, I felt a little stronger. We reached a small clearing, and I realized with a start that this was where I had first realized I was lost. The memory hit me like a physical blow, and I stumbled, falling to my knees. "Alex!" Sarah cried, rushing to my side. I waved her off, struggling to my feet. "I'm okay. It's just... This is where it all started." Jake looked around, his expression somber. "Must be weird being back here." "Weird doesn't begin to cover it," I muttered. We pressed on, the trail becoming less defined, mirroring my journey into the unknown 6 months ago. As we walked, I found myself sharing stories of my ordeal that I hadn't been able to voice before. "There was this moment," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "when I thought I heard a helicopter. I was so sure it was rescue coming, but it was just nothing, just my mind playing tricks on me." Sarah's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Oh, Alex, I can't imagine how that must have felt." "That's the thing," I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "I don't want you to imagine it. I don't want anyone to ever have to go through what I did. That's why I'm doing this." Jake looked at me quizzically. "What do you mean?" I stopped walking, turning to face my friends. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about why I survived when so many others don't. I think I'm meant to use this experience to help others." Understanding dawned on their faces. Sarah was the first to speak. "You mean like becoming a park ranger or a wilderness guide?" I shook my head. "Not exactly. I want to start a program, teaching wilderness survival skills to hikers and campers. I want to make sure that if someone else gets lost out here, They have the knowledge to stay alive until help comes. Jake's face broke into a wide grin. That's amazing, Alex. Count me in. As we continued our hike, the conversation turned to plans for the program. The further we went, the more confident I felt. It was as if each step was not just a conquest of the physical trail, but of the mental barriers I'd built up since my rescue. We were so engrossed in our discussion that we almost missed the sound. A faint cry carried on the wind. I froze, my body tensing. Did you hear that? Jake and Sarah exchanged worried glances. Hear what? Jake asked cautiously. Shh, I hissed, straining my ears. There it was again, a distant call for help. Without thinking, I broke into a run, charging off the trail and into the dense underbrush. I could hear Jake and Sarah calling after me, but their voices faded as I pushed deeper into the forest. The cry came again, louder this time. Help! Is anyone there? I'm coming! I shouted back, my heart racing. This was it. My chance to be on the other side, to be the rescuer instead of the rescued. I burst through a thicket into a small clearing. There, at the base of a steep incline, was a young woman, her leg bent at an unnatural angle. Oh, thank God, she sobbed as she saw me. I thought no one would find me. I rushed to her side, my survival training kicking in. It's okay, you're going to be all right. What's your name? Emily, she managed between pained breaths. I was hiking and I slipped. I think my leg's broken. I nodded, already assessing the situation. Okay, Emily. I'm Alex. Help is on the way. Can you tell me how long you've been out here? As I tended to Emily, keeping her calm and checking for other injuries, I heard Jake and Sarah crashing through the underbrush behind me. Alex, Jake called, his voice frantic. Where are you? Over here, I shouted back. I found someone, she's hurt. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Jake ran back to get cell reception and call for rescue while Sarah and I stayed with Emily, keeping her warm and reassured. As we waited, I found myself sharing parts of my own story, using it to give Emily hope. I know it seems impossible now, I told her, but you're going to get through this, and when you do, you'll be stronger for it. When the rescue helicopter finally arrived, hovering overhead and winching down a paramedic, I felt a surge of emotion. This time, I was on the other side. This time, I was part of the rescue. As Emily was carefully loaded into a rescue basket, she reached out and grabbed my hand. Thank you, she said, her eyes shining with gratitude. You saved my life. I squeezed her hand gently. You saved yourself by staying strong. I just helped a little at the end. We watched as Emily was winched up into the helicopter, the downdraft whipping leaves and debris around us. As the chopper flew off, carrying Emily to safety, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Jake came up beside me, clapping me on the back. You did it, man. You really did it. I turned to him, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. I heard her, Jake, when no one else did. It's like everything I went through was preparing me for this moment. Sarah joined us, wrapping her arms around both of us. You turned your pain into purpose, Alex. That's incredible. As we made our way back to the trailhead, I felt different. The forest that had once been a place of terror now felt not exactly friendly, but no longer hostile. I had faced my fears, conquered my demons, and in doing so, found a new direction for my life. The sun was setting as we emerged from the tree line, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. I paused, taking in the beauty of the moment. You know, I said, turning to Jake and Sarah, I think I'm ready to really start living again. Jake grinned, throwing an arm around my shoulders. Well, it's about time. We've got a survival program to plan, remember? As we walked towards the car, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But for the first time since my rescue, I felt truly excited about what the future might hold. The forest had nearly killed me, but it had also given me a purpose, and as we drove away, the trees receding in the rearview mirror, I knew that I would be back. Not as a victim, not as a survivor, but as someone who could make a difference. On the edge of salvation, I had found my calling. The crisp autumn air nipped at my face as I stood at the podium, facing a sea of eager faces. It had been exactly 1 year since my rescue from the Smoky Mountains, and here I was, about to launch the wilderness survival program I had dreamed up during my recovery. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. "A year ago, I was lost in these mountains, fighting for my life. Today, I stand before you not just as a survivor, but as someone determined to ensure that others have the skills they need to survive if they ever find themselves in a similar situation." As I spoke, I caught sight of familiar faces in the crowd. Jake and Sarah, beaming with pride. My mom, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. And there, in the back, Emily, the hiker I had helped rescue 6 months ago, now one of our program's most enthusiastic supporters. After the presentation, as people milled around signing up for courses, Emily made her way to me. "Alex," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. "That was amazing. You're going to save lives with this program. You know that, right?" I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. "I hope so. I just want to make sure no one else has to go through what we did." As the crowd thinned, Jake approached, a mischievous glint in his eye. "So, Mr. Survival Expert, ready for your next big adventure?" I raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" He grinned, producing a flyer from his pocket. "Search and rescue team is recruiting. Thought you might be interested." I took the flyer, a mix of excitement and trepidation washing over me. "I don't know, Jake. That's a big commitment." "Just think about it," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "You've got the skills, the experience. You could make a real difference." The idea planted by Jake took root, growing over the next few weeks as I threw myself into running the survival courses. Each time I taught someone how to start a fire, find water, or build a shelter, I felt a sense of purpose that had been missing since my ordeal. It was during one of these courses, a month after the program launch, that I received the call that would change everything. "Alex speaking," I answered, stepping away from the group practicing knot tying. "Alex, it's Ranger John." The voice on the other end was tense, urgent. "We've got a situation. A family of 4 missing in the western sector. Been out of contact for 48 hours. We're mounting a search and rescue operation and, well, we could use someone with your expertise." My heart raced, memories of my own time lost in the wilderness flooding back. But along with the fear came a steely resolve. "I'm in. Where do you need me?" The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. I met the search and rescue team at the ranger station, where we pored over maps and formulated a search strategy. As we geared up, I caught sight of my reflection in a window. The face looking back at me was different from the one I'd seen a year ago. Older, yes, but also more confident, more determined. As we set out into the gathering dusk, the weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders. This wasn't a training exercise or a hypothetical scenario. There were real lives at stake. We hiked through the night, calling out and scanning with flashlights. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the underbrush sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. But this time the fear didn't paralyze me. It sharpened my senses, made me more alert. As dawn broke, casting long shadows through the trees, we heard it, a faint call in the distance. "This way," I shouted, breaking into a run. The team followed, crashing through the underbrush. We burst into a small clearing, and there they were, a man, a woman, and 2 young children, huddled together under a makeshift shelter. Their faces, dirty and tear-streaked, lit up with hope as they saw us. "Oh, thank God," the woman sobbed as we approached. We thought no one would find us." As the rest of the team tended to the family, checking for injuries and providing food and water, I found myself face to face with the father. "How did you find us?" he asked, his voice hoarse. We've been moving, trying to find our way back. I placed a hand on his shoulder, remembering all too well the desperation in his eyes. Moving was actually the right thing to do in this case. You found water, made shelter. You kept your family alive. He shook his head, tears welling up. I put them in danger if you hadn't found us. But we did find you, I said firmly. And now, you have a story to tell. A story that might help others avoid the same situation. As we began the journey back, I found myself walking alongside the young boy, no more than 8 years old. "Were you scared?" he asked, looking up at me with wide eyes. I nodded, deciding honesty was the best approach. I was, but being scared is okay. It's what you do when you're scared that matters. He seemed to ponder this for a moment. "We sang songs," he said finally. "When it got really dark and scary, we sang songs. It helped." I smiled, feeling a lump form in my throat. "That was very brave of you. You helped keep your family's spirits up." When we finally emerged from the forest, the relief on everyone's faces was palpable. As the family was led away for medical checkups, Ranger John approached me. "You did good out there, Alex," he said, his gruff voice tinged with respect. "Real good. Ever consider making this official?" I looked back at the forest, then at the rescued family. In that moment, everything crystallized. This was where I was meant to be. This was how I could truly honor the second chance I'd been given. "Where do I sign up?" I asked. The next few months were a blur of training, both physical and mental. I pushed myself harder than I ever had before, driven by the memory of those lost days in the wilderness and the faces of the family we'd rescued. It wasn't easy. There were days when the training brought back vivid flashbacks of my own ordeal. Nights when I woke up in a cold sweat, convinced I was back in the forest, alone and lost. But each time I pushed through, reminding myself why I was doing this. Finally, the day came. I stood with my fellow trainees, waiting to receive our official search and rescue patches. As my name was called, I stepped forward, my heart swelling with pride. "Alexander Matthews," the chief said, pinning the patch to my uniform. "You've shown exceptional skill and dedication, but more than that, you've shown true understanding of what this job means. Welcome to the team." As I shook his hand, I caught sight of my mom in the audience, tears streaming down her face. Jake and Sarah were there too, cheering loudly. And there, in the back, was Emily, giving me a thumbs up. Later, at the small celebration, Jake pulled me aside. "You did it, man," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You took something terrible and turned it into something amazing." I nodded, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since before my ordeal. It feels right, you know? Like this is where I'm supposed to be. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing outside looking up at the stars. The forest stretched out before me, no longer a place of fear, but a place of purpose. A year ago, I had been lost, desperate for rescue. Now, I was the rescuer. The journey had been long and painful, but standing here on the cusp of this new chapter in my life, I knew that every step had been worth it. The forest had nearly claimed my life, but in the end, it had given me something far more valuable: a calling. As I fingered the new patch on my uniform, I made a silent vow. I would use every lesson, every hardship, every moment of fear and triumph from my ordeal to help others, to be the light in the darkness for those lost and afraid. I was no longer just a survivor. I was a rescuer, and I was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. 5 years had passed since my ordeal in the Smoky Mountains. The forest that had once been my prison was now my second home. As a seasoned member of the search and rescue team, I had ventured into its depths countless times, guiding lost hikers to safety and bringing hope to desperate families. But tonight was different. As I stood at the edge of the tree line, watching the sun dip below the horizon, a familiar unease crept over me. Tomorrow marked the anniversary of my rescue, and with it came the annual survival course I taught to commemorate the event. You okay, Alex? Sarah's voice broke through my reverie. She had become a fellow SAR team member, her medical training proving invaluable on our missions. I nodded, forcing a smile. Yeah, just thinking. She squeezed my shoulder gently. The nightmares again? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. They never really go away, do they? No, she said softly, but they change. They become reminders of how far you've come, not just of what you went through. As darkness fell, we made our way back to the ranger station. The place was buzzing with activity. Tomorrow's course had drawn participants from all over the country. Jake, now our team's logistics coordinator, greeted us with a grin. There you are. I was beginning to think you'd gotten lost out there. I chuckled, the familiar banter easing some of my tension. Very funny. Everything set for tomorrow? Jake nodded, his expression turning serious. All ready. But Alex, are you sure you want to do this? We could always get someone else to lead the overnight portion. I shook my head firmly. No, I need to do this. It's important. That night's sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying scenes from that harrowing week 5 years ago. But now, the memories were interwoven with flashes of successful rescues, of lives saved and families reunited. As dawn broke, I rose, feeling a mix of anticipation and apprehension. I made my way to the meeting point where a group of about 20 people had gathered. Their faces were a mix of excitement and nervousness, much like I had felt on that fateful day years ago. Good morning, everyone, I began, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. I'm Alex Matthews, and I'll be leading your wilderness survival course today. Before we begin, I want to share a story with you. As I recounted my experience, the initial excitement of exploration, the growing fear as I realized I was lost, the desperate days of survival, and finally, the moment of rescue, I saw the impact on their faces. Fear, empathy, and determination flickered across their features. I'm not sharing this to scare you, I concluded, but to emphasize the importance of what you'll learn today. These skills saved my life, and they could save yours. As we moved through the day's activities, fire starting, shelter building, water purification, I found myself transported back to my own time in the wilderness. Each skill I taught was a vivid reminder of the lessons I had learned in the harshest of classrooms. But it was the overnight portion of the course that truly tested me. As darkness fell, and we settled into our makeshift camps, the sounds of the forest brought a flood of memories. One of the participants, a young woman named Lisa, approached me as I stoked the campfire. Alex, she said hesitantly, can I ask you something? I nodded, gesturing for her to sit. Of course. How do you do it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How do you come back here after what happened to you? I was silent for a moment, considering her question. It's not easy, I admitted. There are still days when the memories overwhelm me, when every shadow seems to hide a threat. But I come back because this place, it's a part of me now. It nearly broke me, but it also showed me what I'm capable of. Lisa nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. I signed up for this course because I was afraid, she confessed. I've always loved hiking, but after hearing stories like yours, I was terrified of ending up lost. But being here, learning these skills, it's empowering. I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. That's exactly why I do this. Fear is natural, but knowledge is power. And out here it can mean the difference between life and death. As the night wore on, I made my rounds, checking on the participants and offering guidance. But as the others drifted off to sleep, I found myself wide awake, my senses hyper-alert to every sound in the forest. I wandered a short distance from the camp, needing a moment alone. The full moon bathed the forest in an ethereal glow, turning familiar shapes into ghostly silhouettes. For a moment, I was transported back to those terrifying nights alone, lost and desperate. A twig snapped behind me, and I whirled around, my heart racing. But it was only Jake, concern etched on his face. "Thought I might find you out here," he said softly. "Rough night?" I nodded, letting out a shaky breath. "Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever truly be over it, you know?" Jake stepped closer, his presence a comforting anchor. "Maybe you're not supposed to get over it, Alex. Maybe it's about learning to live with it, to use it." His words struck a chord. "You know," I said slowly, "when I was lost out here, I made a promise. I swore that if I survived, I'd find a way to make it mean something, to use what happened to me to help others." Jake smiled, clapping me on the shoulder. "And look at you now. You've saved lives, Alex. You've given people the tools to save themselves. I'd say you've more than kept that promise." As we made our way back to the camp, a sense of peace settled over me. The forest was still dark, still full of potential dangers, but it no longer held the same terror it once did. It was a challenge now, a teacher, a place of both trial and triumph. The next morning, as we packed up and prepared to head back, I gathered the group for one final talk. "You came here to learn survival skills," I began, looking at each face in turn. "But I hope you're leaving with something more. The wilderness can be dangerous, yes, but it can also be a place of incredible beauty and self-discovery. Respect it, prepare for it, but don't fear it." As we hiked back to the ranger station, I fell into step beside Lisa. "So," I asked, "how do you feel now?" She smiled, a new confidence in her stride. "Honestly, I feel ready. Not just for hiking, but for whatever comes. Thank you, Alex, for everything." Back at the station, as the participants departed and the team began to clean up, I found myself drawn once again to the edge of the forest. The late afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Sarah joined me, her presence a quiet comfort. "Another successful course," she said. "You should be proud, Alex." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "It's more than that, though. Every time I do this, every time I come back here, it's like I'm reclaiming a piece of myself, the part I thought I'd lost out there." She took my hand, squeezing it gently. "You never lost it, Alex. You just needed to find a new way to see it." As we stood there, the forest stretched out before us, I realized a fundamental truth. The aftermath of my ordeal wasn't just about survival or recovery. It was about transformation. The forest had changed me, challenged me, nearly destroyed me. But it had also revealed strengths I never knew I possessed, given me a purpose I might never have found otherwise. The nightmares might never fully disappear. The memories would always be there. But they no longer controlled me. Instead, they drove me, pushing me to help others, to turn my pain into purpose. As the sun set on another anniversary, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, for my survival, yes, but also for the journey that followed, for the chance to turn a harrowing experience into a force for good. The forest had once been my greatest fear. Now, it was my greatest teacher. And as I turned to head back, ready for whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, I knew one thing for certain. I was exactly where I was meant to be,